in a sense, your life is sacrificial. It's a means to an end. Nature is trying to do something through you, and your only choice is you resist it or you let it go. That's all there is to it. It's the only choice you can ever make in your life. The moment you do that, you become a slave. But it's also the moment when you, for the first time, become free.
This is an emergency broadcast. This is not a test.
Welcome, everybody, to the Dad's Doomsday Guide. Today, we are pleased to have on Bernardo Kastrup. He is the executive director of Essentia Foundation. His work has been leading the modern renaissance of metaphysical idealism, the notion that reality is essentially mental. He has 2 Ph.Ds, one in philosophy and the second in computer engineering. As a scientist, Bernardo has worked for the European Organization for Nuclear Research, you might know it as CERN, and the Philips Research Laboratories. Appearing in many academic papers and books, his ideas have been featured on Scientific American, the Institute of Art and Ideas, the Blog of American Philosophical Association, and Big Think, among others. Welcome, Bernardo. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
I think to start, and I just kind of mentioned to you before, if you ever get tired of kind of answering the same questions and how people come at interviews and based on their own experiences. And I'm not a scientist. I haven't had any kind of training in physics or mathematics, any high level. For me, questions about reality and what our purposes came from basically suffering and kind of growing up in a Catholic upbringing and having that faith challenged pretty harshly as you kind of see kind of the world unfold and how kind of a cold and calculated place it can seem at times. And I think there's a lot of people like me who struggle with their own religious beliefs, but feel like materialism or atheism doesn't sit right either. And so they're kind of stuck in this limbo. And I kind of had it up front and personal with my dad who got sick and passed away. And I just remember being so angry and started questioning again, why are we here? What's the point? Like, is this just some kind of sick cosmic game?
So he or you?
Me. And my dad, I was so strong in his faith. And I remember him having cards and stuff and rosary beads next to his bed as he was basically just eaten alive by cancer. And it was just so difficult to watch my hero being destroyed that way. And I had these thoughts before because we all have, we all know someone who had something horrible happen. So we all get exposed to this, whether you're a kid and you're exposed to it or life just wears you down and beats you down as you get older. And it kind of like leaves you sitting there kind of wondering what the hell's going on. I started kind of looking into, and I talked to Dr. Edward Kelly, and I started interviewing people with near-death experiences, and it kind of started opening me up to things outside of my own little circle of belief and how Catholicism tells you, oh, it's the fall and sin, original sin, and how, and it's like, that's fine. And I don't disparage anyone who like really believes that, but frankly, it's not good enough. I don't want to rely on a text that's 2,000 or 3,000 years old and you just have to believe it, and just, you don't ask questions, just have faith. And I don't know, for you, and I know materialists would say there's nothing, don't worry about it. It's all over anyway. But it gravitated me to you because you seem like someone who is willing to try to make analogies and reach out to people like myself who kind of are searching for answers, but don't necessarily have the scientific background to kind of maybe pursue those or come up with those on their own. How did you get to the point where you're at now with, is it metaphysical idealism? Is it analytical idealism? What's the appropriate term?
Analytic idealism is a metaphysical form of idealism because
Okay.
you also have ethical idealism, which is you hold to ideals like be a good person and help your neighbor.
Mhm.
That's ethical idealism. Metaphysical idealism and analytic idealism is a form of metaphysical idealism. Basically, it says that the whole of existence is mental in nature. Not your mind, your personal mind alone, not my personal mind alone. There is a world out there beyond our individual minds, but that world, as it is in itself, is also mental, just like our thoughts are mental.
Materialism would be believing like the desk I see, the wood I can touch and feel, like that's all there is. It's just no matter how much you zoom down, there's some matter that you can say that, oh, everything has arisen from this.
Well, not quite, because materialism would say the table that you can touch and feel, the table that you can experience with your eyes, with your hands, that table is entirely inside your skull. because all qualities of experience are supposed to be produced by your brain inside your skull. Now, there is a table out there, but it's not the table you experience. It's a completely abstract object that modulates your experience of a table. But the table as it is, in and of itself, according to materialism, has no color, has no texture. It is just something that can be entirely describable through a set of abstract quantitative relationships. And you cannot visualize the table as it is in itself, because visualization already entails experience. It entails qualities, colors, textures, sounds. And according to materialism, there is none of that out there in the world. All of that is produced by your brain inside your skull.
Okay. And were you ever... Go ahead, sorry.
The difference is both analytic and idealism grant that there is a world beyond our individual minds. But idealism would say that world beyond is also mental. And materialism would say, I don't know what that world beyond is. It's entirely abstract. But I will stipulate that it's not mental. It's not of the same kind as my experiences. It's something of an entirely other kind. And of course, that postulate is unnecessary, because what you have to do is concede that there is something going on beyond our individual minds, beyond our wishes, our fantasies, something we cannot change just by wishing it to be different, something that doesn't disappear just because you're not experiencing it. That has to be granted. But there is absolutely no need to go further and say, not only is it beyond my individual mind, it's beyond mind as a category of existence. That's completely unnecessary and leads to all kinds of problems and restricts the explanatory power of materialism substantially and leads to internal contradictions.
Now, I would imagine that you at one time were a materialist and then you kind of transitioned to this. And then if so, how did that happen? What stuck out to you as like, oh, that's not right. I need to look for something else.
Well, I was a materialist, but an unthinking one. I never thought it through. I was educated since very early in an environment that breathed materialism as a sort of an assumption that nobody questioned. I went to university, I was just 17. And then my first job in life, 2 days after I defended my master thesis, was at CERN, the cathedral, the world cathedral of materialism. Not that CERN scientists are preoccupied with questions of being. They're not preoccupied with what nature is. What they want to know is how nature behaves. But they all sort of automatically assumed materialism, and so did I. And the way, what came up in my life that forced me to rethink it was my work on AI, because you're developing things and computers that are capable of solving very difficult problems better than physicists. So the thing you're doing is intelligent in any reasonable definition of intelligence. It can produce the solution to difficult problems. And then you ask yourself, well, what do I need to change or add to this intelligent silicon computer to make sure that not only does it process data intelligently, but that the data processing is accompanied by experience in the same way that what goes on in my brain is accompanied by experience. And then you sort of start facing a wall. And if you knock your head against that wall long enough, you realize that whatever you do with that computer, it will only change structure and function. And no change in structure or function will ever give you any more or any less reason to think that the computer is conscious or not conscious. These two domains are incommensurable. And then you realize that, hey, then if I'm facing an impossible contradiction of my way of thinking, where did my thinking go wrong? What assumption am I making that is leading me to this wall that I cannot pass? So you have to backtrack until you find the step that has led you down that alley that has no exit, that goes nowhere, and you make a different choice. And for me, the different choice was the assumption that I never questioned, that consciousness is something that can be created out of a non-conscious substrate, which is an assumption. All we ever have is consciousness. Whatever has never touched the field of consciousness might as well not exist, because even the world we see around us is a conscious experience of colors, melodies, flavors, textures, aromas, and so forth. Not to mention, our sadness, our elation, our happiness, our depression, and so on. So I realized that that assumption ought to go because it was arbitrary and it was the root of the problems I was facing. So I reversed the assumption because, any explanation of nature, any theory of what nature is, has to grant what we call an ontological primitive. You cannot explain one thing in terms of another forever. Otherwise, it never ends, or you go all the way around and then it becomes a circular explanation, which is obviously a logical fallacy. So at some point, you have to stop the chain of explanation and you have to say, well, this simply exists. And I will explain everything else in terms of it. But that last thing in the chain of explanation simply exists. You have to grant one free miracle, like Terence McKenna used to say. And for materialism, the ontological primitive are 17 quantum fields, which are not explained. You explain everything else in terms of the fields, and you just say, well, in those 17 fields, they just exist. It's what is there. I cannot explain them. I explain everything else in terms of them, but the fields are 17 free miracles. So I figured, well, everybody has to choose a free miracle. My free miracle will be consciousness. I will choose that there is a field of subjectivity underlying all nature, and I'll try to explain everything else in terms of that field. If I succeed, then I have a very neat, parsimonious way to make sense of things that doesn't incur into the internal contradictions and insoluble problems of materialism. And lo and behold, it's quite easy to explain everything else in terms of a field of consciousness.
So would it be accurate to say that because we only can view things through our own consciousness, our own perceptions, that we really can't know anything else? And it's kind of foolish to start to say, well, yeah, but this is outside of that, and that's outside. Well, no, we only can see and perceive what through our own mind. So how do you know anything else is true?
Well, that would be solipsism, and that's not idealism.
Okay,
that's the notion that I will only give credence to things I can experience myself directly. So all that exists is the world I see, and nobody else experiences other things. So if I were a solipsist, I'd be skeptical that you are conscious. I would say you exist only insofar as this little image on my screen. Everything else is theory. All I can assert to be the case is the pixels on my screen right now. So you don't really exist as a conscious entity. You exist as a figure in my own imagination, in my own dream. So solipsism is the assumption that all of reality is in my mind.
Okay.
Idealism is different. Idealism would say you are conscious because I can infer very reasonably that since you are a human being very analogous to me, both in structure and in behavior, I have every reason to grant that you too are conscious, that you too experience the world from your perspective, which is different from mine. So that's what idealism would say. Idealism would grant that there are many, many things beyond our personal experiences. But even those things that are beyond my personal experience, those things are in and of themselves also mental, even though I cannot access them. For instance, I don't know what your thoughts are right now. I cannot access your thoughts directly, but I grant that they exist and they are mental.
Okay.
You see?
Yeah.
So analytic idealism is doing the same for the rest of the universe. I don't know what's happening in the galaxy of Andromeda. I have no access to it. I cannot experience it directly. It's not part of my mind, but I grant that it exists and it is mental, even though not part of my mind, just as your thoughts are mental, even though not part of my mind. Of the three main metaphysical theories of nature today, materialism, panpsychism, and idealism, each one of them faces a canonical problem. So for materialism, you face the hard problem of consciousness, which means that there is nothing about material parameters or arrangements in terms of which we could explain experience. So that's an insoluble problem, it turns out. People have been trying to solve it for decades, and we've concluded now that not only we haven't solved it, it is unsolvable in principle. And then you have constitutive panpsychism, which says, well, there is matter, And matter has charge, matter has mass, but matter also has consciousness. So elementary subatomic particles are conscious fundamentally. You don't need to explain that further. They just are. You grant another miracle to nature. And our conscious inner lives are just the combination of the subjective perspectives of all the bazillions of elementary subatomic particles constituting our brain. Their subjectivities somehow combine. Now, this faces the combination problem, which basically means that there is no coherent account for how minds, fundamentally separate minds, could combine to form higher level minds. Mm-hmm. And it is also it also contradicts physics because it assumes elementary subatomic particles to be like little balls with spatial boundaries, mm-hmm. and that's not what particles are in quantum field theory. The name particle is just a historical inheritance and at best a metaphor. Mm. Particles are just oscillations in a spatially unbound field, like ripples in the lake.
Okay.
What we call a particle is just a ripple. There's nothing to the ripple but the lake. So there's nothing to a particle but the underlying quantum field. And panpsychism contradicts this. So that doesn't fly either. Mm. So we are left with the third, which is analytic idealism. And analytic idealism would say, there is no combination because there is only one mind. Just like the quantum fields are spatially unbound, analytic idealism would say the field of subjectivity underlying nature is spatially unbound. And if it's unbound, then there is only one. But then the problem you have is if you and I are segments of that one mind, how come I can't read your thoughts? Mm-hmm. How come I don't know what's happening in the galaxy of Andromeda? Not even in China, let alone the galaxy of Andromeda. Mm. And that's the decomposition problem. But lo and behold, for this one, there is an empirical solution, very obvious and staring us in the face, which is we know that people can undergo dissociation and their seemingly unitary mind seemingly fragments itself into multiple disjoint centers of awareness, of experience. And we've known this for 200 years, but since the turn of the century, we know that this is for real. People are not lying about this because we can put these people in a functional brain scanner and see that dissociative processes look like something unique. Mm-hmm. They can be differentiated from other neural processes.
Is there anything interesting going on in the brain for those people who have that happen? Is it anything that would be like, when they compare like psychedelics and the brain going dark and still having an experience? Is there anything that sticks out, I guess, that's different about that disassociation with people who have that?
Yeah, there are spectacular things. I'll mention two examples, two studies. There is this study by two German neuroscientists, 2015, studying a woman with a dissociative identity disorder. And she had multiple alters, which is a technical name for these disjoint personalities, these disjoint centers of experience. Mm-hmm. And a couple of the alters claimed to be blind. So what they did was they put an EEG cap on the woman's head to measure brain activity. And lo and behold, when alter that claimed to be blind had executive control of the woman's body, brain activity in the visual cortex here, the back of the brain, would disappear, even though the woman's eyes were opening and her eyes functioned.
That's crazy.
And that's something you cannot fake.
No.
When the host personality would be back in control, then brain activity in the cerebral cortex, in the visual cortex, would just pop back.
That's wild.
To be there again, yeah. So the dissociation is literally blinding. It blinds you to what is right in front of your eyes, even if your eyes are open and working fine.
Yeah.
Another example is a much older study from the late 90s done at Harvard University. Turned out that researchers could verify that for 1/4 of patients with dissociative identity disorder, or DID, multiple alters would partake in the same dream and experience the same dream from their own unique perspective. And they would see each other. So different alters would be different characters in the dream. And they could see each other, speak to each other. There is a dream report there in which one of the alters clubs the other one over the head. So how do they know that? Well, they know because when the patient would be awake and report the dream, the researchers would ask for each alter to report what he or she dreamed about last night. So they would get a different report from every alter, But they would then realize that although the reports were different, they were reports of different points of view within the same dream.
That is so fascinating.
Which they reported the presence of the other outer. So if one outer would say, I saw a girl come into the room, look around and go out, the outer corresponding to that girl would say, I just came into a room looking for someone else. I didn't find him there. And then I came out. Oh yeah, there was somebody else in a corner.
That is so, I had no idea, because when the DID thing, I thought, when I read about that a while ago, it was still like, people were like, oh, we're not really sure if it's like JIT or not, but I had no idea about those studies. And that is crazy. I've never heard that before.
It takes a particularly severe form of DID for you to have this kind of dreams. 1/4 of patients have reported this, which is a lot. 1/4 is beyond statistical significance. It means it's common.
Okay.
That was research, I believe, done by Deirdre Barrett. She's one of the famous researchers of DID in Harvard. I'm mistaken it, but I think the paper came out of her own pen. Yeah, the hypothesis is that this is exactly what's happening now in the universal mind. There is no outside world from the point of view of the universal mind, because it is all that exists. So it can only, quote, dream, experience things that are experiences produced endogenously from within itself. So it's a kind of a dream, and we are the authors. We are dissociated segments of this universal mind, that being the reason why I can't read your thoughts, but I can see you. Just like in the dreams of those patients, the authors could see one another and even club each other over the head.
Which human beings do to each other all the time. Yeah, we always hurt each other. So I guess the question would be, and a lot of these might be very just like, I don't know, materialism, and that's so ingrained in my head, bleeding over into that understanding, kind of like crossing over into like this idealism that I'm, the conception that everything's mental, and not quite grasping that. But why would we be segments of this mind? Like what, I mean, I guess if it's just its nature, is that the argument? And this is just what it does. And because what would keep us that way too? I mean, I would imagine death would be the final break to bring us back to that source, that mind. Do you have any theories about that in terms of like how that would work?
Well, the first thing to keep in mind is that you never leave it. Just like the alters of a patient with DID never leave the mind of the patient. It's all happening in that one mind. There is only that one mind, and experience within that one mind happens in such a way that there seems to be cognitive dissociation. That's all there is to it. So you're not going back, and you never left anything. You are right now where you have always been and will always be. It's just that your mode of consciousness, your state of consciousness changes. You are in a dissociative state. And at some point you will not be, because if metabolism, biology, if that's what dissociative processes look like within the mind of nature, then the end of life, the end of biology, the end of the body, of metabolism, that's the end of the dissociation. And you presumably return to a less dissociated state, I would imagine. But that's just a change in your state of mind. It's not like you're becoming anything that you are not, or that you haven't been before. Now, why does dissociation happen? Why do volcanoes erupt? Why do stars go supernova? Why does it rain? Because these are parts of the things that can happen in nature. And if they can happen, given enough time, they are bound to happen. And dissociation happens in human beings. It's one of the things that can happen in human beings. It happens to all of us. Severe forms usually are a response to trauma, an attempt by the mind to compartmentalize different aspects of the traumatic story so it doesn't have to face it all at once. But you are dissociated every time you fall asleep and dream, because you think you are your dream avatar. And you think the rest of the dream, the houses around, the streets, the other people, the cars, you think that's not you. Well, in fact, it is you. You are doing the entire dream. But during the dream, you are dissociated. You think you're only your dream avatar and not the rest of the dream. When you wake up, the dissociation ends and your dream avatar dies. He's toast. He's gone. The moment you open your eyes, he's gone.
Yeah.
But you don't go around mourning the death of your dream avatar because you realized it was you and it's still you and nothing is lost. It's just something you are doing. You're dissociated every time you forget something that you can remember later. Forgetting is dissociation.
Okay.
It's the inability to cognitively follow a chain of associations until that content you're trying to remember. But if you feel a certain smell that is cognitively associated with that which you're trying to remember, it reassociates and comes back. So dissociation it's happening all the time. All the time it's happening. If you're not experiencing all of your memories all the time, then you are dissociated all the time, which is the case.
Okay.
The only thing idealism does is to extrapolate this empirical fact beyond the individual minds. And that, as it turns out, is the most plausible solution for any of the three canonical problems I was referring to. Mm-hmm. The hard problem of consciousness, the combination problem, and the decomposition problem.
I guess maybe it would make sense to discuss mind and what attributes that would have, because for me, it's like the traditional vision of like a god versus what this mind is, and then how it does this disassociation with its part of itself, and that's just what it does. But like maybe it's just a human thing and like evolution, like always seeking a purpose and a why. Like, why is that happening? Well, why are we put in this position to where it's suffering is inflicted upon itself? And is it learning as we're having these personal experiences? Is it self-aware? Kind of all these questions start arising when you talk about what is this mind for you? What attributes does it have?
I think the clues we have is to look at evolutionary history. I mean, there have been countless minded beings before us, back 4 billion years of the evolution of life on this planet. And what you can see is that mental faculties have evolved at great cost over the eons and have reached arguably their current peak with us. You could still hold some doubt about this because, cetaceans have much bigger brains than we do, even more, more structured brains than we have, many, many, many more neurons. And you could say, well, that's only to control a much larger body like the blue whale. But, is that really so? But clearly, mental faculties have evolved. And a particularly significant faculty is self-awareness, is what gives you the ability to say, I have hunger instead of I am hunger. You see, because now when you say I have hunger, you are saying I am the subject who is experiencing the hunger. Mm-hmm. That's self-reflection. That's metacognition. Conscious metacognition or self-awareness. There are many names for it, but it's your ability to look upon your own experiences, not as you, but as experiences of you as the subject of the experiences. So, and this is a fantastic step because it allows us to predict the future, to review the past. It allows us to get some degree of self-control by saying to ourselves, I am experiencing this emotion now. Do I have good reason to experience this emotion? Or to sort of try to calm ourselves down, or to get a grip, or to deliberate and be premeditative, be thoughtful about how we go about things. These are all things that have evolved very, very late. Metacognition has evolved in human beings about 30 to 50,000 years ago. That's less than a blink of an eye ago. It just happened. It has just happened. So if it has taken nature so long to produce this meta-consciousness or metacognition capability in a primate, I don't think it was there from the beginning. Why would it have cost 4 billion years for this to evolve? So I think in the beginning, this field of subjectivity that underlies all nature, the universal mind, if you will, I think its mental activity is not self-reflective. It's not premeditated. It is spontaneous, like nature is spontaneous. Nature, when you pose a question to it, it answers spontaneously by behaving in a certain way. We call it experiments. So I think the mind of nature in its primordial original state is not deliberate, is not self-aware, doesn't have a plan. It's spontaneous. It's spontaneous just like Yahweh is spontaneous in the book of Job in the Old Testament. The mind behind the storms. And when God goes on that tirade against Job, when Job finally gets his audience to argue for his righteousness, and God says, "Who are you to question me? I am the mind behind the storms." And he goes on and on and on. Basically what he's saying is, I am spontaneous. I don't really know what I'm doing. That's basically what he's saying. And it takes Job to go to God and say, well, these are the consequences of what you're doing. You should be aware of them through my eyes.
Yeah, exactly. So do you still feel like that's its present state? Or do you think that through billions of years of evolution, the self-conscious experience that human beings have, does that trickle back? Does it become more self-aware? Is it evolving as well as we are? I mean, because we're it, essentially.
It gathers more contents of experience that have been produced by self-awareness, insights that have been produced by self-awareness. Why? Because if we are dissociated experiential complexes of the mind of nature, and we are self-aware and we are metacognizant, and we have insights about what's going on that allows us to say, look, it's not okay what's happening in Ukraine right now. That really is not okay. We have this capability of passing value judgments to what's happening in nature. And say that's good or that's not good, because I know that people are suffering and for no good reason. That shouldn't happen. And then one day you die. What happens when you die? Well, death is the end of the dissociation. So your insights, which were bound by your dissociative boundary, they are now released in a much broader cognitive space. They're sort of released into the whole, so to say. You could, to use religious language, you could say you're seeding insights in the mind of God, just like Job did. And many, many millions and billions of human beings have already died in the course of our history. And whatever insights they had, they are trickling in somewhere. The problem is that we are little monkeys running around a tiny little rock, hurtling through infinite space. So if our bodies are the exterior appearance of our mental inner life, which is what I think a body is just what mental inner life looks like from the outside. It's a representation of mental inner life. Then imagine what the body of the universe represents. Imagine the inner life of the universe. It's not metacognitive, but it's unfathomably, incomprehensibly broad and deep, even though not metacognitive. So our little insights trickling through as we die one by one probably make very, very little difference in the grand scheme of things. On the other hand, in mind space, physical size doesn't translate one to one. So I don't know.
Would you say that near-death experiences or psychedelic mystical experiences are a window into what it might be like once you die, to see that melting back in?
Absolutely. Yeah, very unreliable, noisy, deceitful windows. Not because somebody's trying to deceive you, but because when you screw up with your mind, it's very difficult to rely on the particulars of your experience. But sure, I mean, psychedelics we have known now for 10 years. We always thought that psychedelics produced these spectacular trips. Now, the most intense, memorable experiences of one's life, we thought that they did that by lighting up the brain like a Christmas tree. And for 10 years now, we know that all psychedelics studied do precisely the opposite. They only reduce brain activity very, very significantly, particularly in the default mode network, which correlates with your ego, your sense of self. When you're not engaged in any activity, you're just thinking about something to yourself. That's the area of the brain in which brain activity is significantly repressed by psychedelics. So what psychedelics do is basically not only put your brain to sleep, but to simulate the death of your brain. because of the significant reduction of metabolism. And it's the only safe way to do that, short of, stopping your heart and waiting for you to come back after a minute and see what tales you have to tell to the tribe. But that only happens in movies, as far as we know, because it's not ethical.
Yeah.
But psychedelics are the best model for death. And death is the end of the dissociation. So in my view, the reduction of brain activity caused by psychedelics, that's the representation, the external appearance of a reduction in the dissociative process. But when the dissociative boundaries become more porous, more permeable because of psychedelics, you pick up on mental stuff that is surrounding you already in your cognitive vicinity. Mm-hmm. The thing is, it's a messy process. It's noisy and unreliable. Some people come back and saying, well, I met the aliens from the Pleiades sending us heart vibrations. Right. Yeah. Okay.
What do you think about the entities when that's mixed in there? What is that? Is that just part of your subconscious? And I know they talk about different deep-seated evolutionary things that maybe personality and them serving different persons. Almost like for me, because I do a lot of film and writing, it's archetypes and the hero's journey, if you're familiar with that, but there's different serving purposes of the personality. Is that what that is? Or do you think that's something of the mind?
I think both. It depends on what entities, under what circumstances, who is having the trip. I think in a psychedelic experience, there is enormous potential for self-deception, gargantuan potential for self-deception, because mind's prime directive is to deceive itself. That's how reality is created.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we would know it's just one mind going on, and this dissociation, it's just me deceiving myself, but that's not what's going on. So it's the prime directive of mind to deceive itself. So I would be skeptical of most reports of people coming back from a high and saying, well, I met these entities, these aliens, and they told me this and that. That's not to say that they are all false, because who is to state without doubt that our sense organs have evolved to pick up everything that is surrounding us? Evolution would have evolved sense organs to pick up on what is salient, on what is relevant for our survival, and whatever is not relevant, we wouldn't pick up. So when you go on a psychedelic trip and your dissociative boundary reduces, then it's conceivable that you access dissociated complexes of the mind of nature, entities with their own inner life, if you will, that are not perceivable because they have no bearing on your ability to survive or your risk of death. So we don't pick up any representation of those with our eyes, with our ears. They are irrelevant. But when we are dissociated and we transcend our sense organs and we sort of pick up on our cognitive boundary, it is conceivable that there are semi-dissociated alters, non-human alters out there that are not part of the physical world because they don't have a bearing on the survival of our alter. That is conceivable.
That's really interesting, because would you clump that into what people perceive as quote unquote the paranormal, or any kind of odd experiences that maybe things are crossing over a little bit there with things that we cannot perceive? Because, a lot of it may just be kind of crazy, and a lot of it probably is kind of crazy. But now we're talking about that small percentage of things that, are experienced by, quote unquote, sane people that are seeing things or experiencing things. And I know that I just edited the interview with Dr. Edward Keller from the University of Virginia, and he's really into the paranormal and all those different kind of experiences. Would you say that's maybe what's going on, at least in your framework?
Insofar as you take the evidence seriously, that is probably the only truly coherent account of what that might be. Yeah. And I do take ED very seriously. I do take DOPS very seriously, the Department of Perceptual Studies of the University of Virginia Medical School, where Ed works, and Bruce Grayson. And
I talked to Bruce Grayson as well.
They have a world-class team in there. Their studies, I think, are reliable. I take Dean Radin very seriously. I think he's a very honest, intelligent, and rigorous scientist. So insofar as you take this evidence to be reliable, and I do take some of it, not most of it. It's a zoo when it goes to the paranormal. Yeah. Paranormal literature is just like, oh God, no, spare me that cup. But some people I take seriously, and I just named them. So I am open to the possibility that there are dissociated complexes of the mind of nature in our cognitive surrounding, and that our sense organs have not evolved to pick up, because they can neither increase our risk of death or reduce it. We don't interact at that level. It is possible.
Can those things act upon us in any way? Because you hear, like, whether it's like, exorcisms or possessions or any kind of like really strange things going on. We talked to a psychiatrist who actually meets with people before they undergo any kind of exorcism to kind of rule out like DID or any other various mental illness. Would you say that they can interact with us in that way, in a negative way, if they would choose to?
I think if they could interact physically, we would have more reports of it. Can they interact mentally? Well, let me rephrase the question and put it back to you, because the answer will become obvious. You are a patient with DID. You are dissociated, not only from the universal mind, but internally dissociated as well, a level down the hierarchy. We know from the medical literature that authors have different agendas. One author wants you to go to work in that place, and the other author wants you to become an artist. And they're both you. And because they are dissociated, they have different agendas for you. And we know from the literature that they can play tricks on one another. They can undermine one another. Another example of this is the Freudian slip. When a part of you is watching your ego, do its dance and play its role, and then it says, no, I mean something else here, and then poof, it comes out, even though you don't want to say that, something comes out that reveals your inner life. They are all you, but they are dissociated parts of you that do interact with one another. Mm-hmm. For the same reason that sometimes you struggle with the decision, should I stay or should I go? To be or not to be.
Yeah.
These are mildly dissociated mental complexes of your own mind, struggling against one another, trying to influence one another. When you talk yourself into something, that's what you're doing. Mm-hmm. But it's a mild level of dissociation. Now, there can be extreme levels of dissociation in which you can talk about a possession. Yes, that can happen. Would it still be you? I think most of the times it would still be you, a repressed part of your mind. I mean, in the 19th century, during those very prude times in Europe in which women were not allowed to have sexual desire because it was sin to have sexual desire. You're supposed to have children, but not sexual desire. So they would have their entire sexual life repressed and dissociated. What would happen? They would then have hysteria. Hyster is a root for a word that means womb. So hysteria is a female-only mental condition, which no longer exists. Why? Because that part of women is not dissociated anymore. So it doesn't have to influence your ego from the outside and basically destroy you. But that part is still you. Now, the question is, are there really transpersonal, you talked about possession, are there transpersonal demons? It is possible. I would be skeptical, I think, of most of the reports of that, but I would not be able to refute that in principle. I think it is conceivable. I mean, look, we know a mental condition called addiction. It's very prevalent. And addiction is when you cannot stop doing something that is harming you. But there is a part of you that feeds on that harm. Mm-hmm. And if you repress that kind of mental dynamics enough, or even if it's not yours, but it's in your cognitive vicinity in that field of nature, that field of subjectivity in nature, it is possible that some of that latches on you to feed on your anxiety, to feed on your despair. But this is not unheard of. It happens within human beings. We call it addiction. Sometimes we become so conditioned to anxiety that even when the external source of anxiety is removed, we keep on being anxious. We cannot stop that. We find another reason to be anxious.
Yeah.
So that kind of self-referential behavior that feeds on harm, it exists in us. Could it exist beyond us? Sure, it could. Yeah, and it could partly associate with us cognitively, just like you remember things. Some of these complexes may partly associate with us, and you would call that demonic possession. It is possible. It is possible. I don't think there are sadistic demons, but I think we know there are mental dynamics that feed on distress, and it is possible that there are some of these dynamics at a transpersonal level that can attach to us. I cannot discard that in principle, even though I would be skeptical of the vast majority of reports that could be interpreted this way.
That's really interesting. Now, I talked to Dr. Kelly, and he had mentioned, I was like, oh, well, should you, because he was talking about accessing higher levels of consciousness, and I was like, well, do you recommend being careful? Is there a danger to dabbling with that stuff, right? From a strictly religious perspective, they'd say, oh, you can't mess with that. You're opening portals to demons and whatever. And this, he did express a little bit of wariness, you should be a little bit careful, whether that's psychedelics or something else, you can experience some bad situations. Do you echo those same concerns, or do you feel like whether it's psychedelics or whether it's meditation or whether it's some other form, that you're generally okay?
No, you have to be very careful.
Okay.
Psychedelics will never kill you physiologically. It is impossible for the vast majority of them. At least we don't have recorded deaths of psychedelics killing you physiologically. They kill you in the sense that you go crazy and you jump out of a window. That can happen. But you have to be careful, because there are rooms in the palace of mind that of our own minds, let alone whatever is beyond us. There are rooms that we don't visit often, that our culture doesn't even recognize that they can be there. And when you are confronted with those aspects of yourself, when you enter that room in your mind, it can be very disconcerting.
Would you echo? Sorry, go ahead. Well, I was going to say, because it's secrets you're holding from yourself, you're not being honest with yourself, or things that you. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. That's one big thing. Another big thing is when you realize that in mental space you can transcend all of your conceptual and logical references. That what's going on transcends even logic, and brings you into very, very, very unfamiliar cognitive territory that you don't know how to handle.
So you lose yourself?
Another thing, you lose yourself. Yeah.
Okay.
But the most important thing is ego dissolution. And ego dissolution is not terrible. On the contrary, if you navigate that carefully a couple of times, it becomes exhilarating. It's absolutely exhilarating to part with the ego. It's like you unshackle yourself. It's like you've been in solitary confinement in a room without windows for 30 years, and then suddenly somebody opens the window. And you go, oh, no, that's that. But first time you go through it, you're absolutely sure that you're dying. Jeez. Because you are dying. Your ego is dying. And ego loss, ego dissolution is not for young players, if you know what I mean.
I've always wanted to try it, but I'm scared, worried
that's very good
to lose myself, because I have three little kids, 6, 4, and 2. I want to be here. I want to be present for them. I want to be, around.
Oh, you will not lose yourself permanently.
Okay, because like you see some dude wandering on the beach, he's like a bum, and they're like, "Yeah, he had a bad trip once." And I'm like, "Why don't that guy?"
No. His personality type was that already,
Okay.
and that was only expressed more because of the psychedelics. But if you're not like that, you're not going to turn into somebody you are not. But only during the trip. During the trip, you lose yourself.
Okay.
And so you should always have a sober sitter to make sure that you don't do anything stupid.
Mm-hmm.
But I never even wanted to do anything stupid. I never wanted to stand up or even open my eyes.
Mm-hmm.
So that you don't need to worry. You will always be back. And that's the bad news too, because it can expand your horizon tremendously. And you come back and you think, I can never be the same. And you are right. There is a sense in which you will never be the same. But 2 days later, you're like, oh, I'm totally back. I have all my worries again. And I see the world in this claustrophobic and gray way again. Why couldn't I hold on to that? Mm-hmm. Life as a dissociative process is very strong. It has a tremendous pull. It will always force you back. It will always bring you back. Your metabolism is an incredible feedback system that self-stabilizes in the face of entropy. It's incredibly strong. So it's the bad news. You will never lose yourself permanently. No, unless you're already prone to losing yourself anyway, and you just need, a little push.
Yeah. When you
don't strike me as that type of person.
No, I mean, when you talk about like ghosts or any kind of, like, if you even discuss that, I'm just like, I don't need to hear that. Like, let's just focus on reality here. Like, don't even open to me to that stuff.
Well, look, it would be a lie to tell you that psychedelic experiences are always pleasant. Mm-hmm. They're always incredibly enlightening, educative, insightful. But the best insights come in the face of tremendous suffering. So you'll be confronted with stuff that I cannot word and that you cannot even conceive if you've never had a significant reduction in the level of your dissociation from the universal mind, because you cannot word it. And at the same time, it's incredibly familiar. And that is the biggest cognitive dissonance. It's the weirdest thing you could imagine is also the most familiar. And it is you.
That's so strange.
And you are the weirdest. You have no idea what you are.
That's what you hear about when I was talking to Bruce Grayson. He was like, people who had near-death experiences, they come back and they go, I can't even describe to you what I just experienced. And then he says, our next question is, can you describe what you just experienced? And it's funny because he says that they have, no matter how wonderful it is, they don't have any suicide attempts afterward. They don't want to go back to it in that sense because they know they're going to eventually, but they have purpose now. Would you say the same thing for psychedelics? There's no, you mean you're bummed out that you're not there anymore, or you're not experiencing that anymore, but you're not like, I'm going to kill myself because I want to experience like,
No. Well, if you are a teenager and you're already going through the usual stresses, psychological stresses and pressures of that phase of life, and you throw on top of it a strong, short-acting psychedelic like Salvinorium A, it can exacerbate a problem and lead you to suicide. Yeah, I don't doubt that can happen. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important that I would suggest, maybe I'm being too square, but I think psychedelics is something that makes sense from your 35th year onwards.
Yeah.
Because before that, not only you're more vulnerable, it doesn't have the same payoff. You have to be at a certain point in your psychological maturation process for that to have a payoff, for that to be insightful. Otherwise, you just go there and you come back and say, oh man, far out. That's it. There is no growth.
Yeah.
There is not, you don't bring back any fish for the tribe, including yourself. You leave it all there.
Yeah, I was very close to, I feel like I need that at this point because I've hit a juncture where I'm very frustrated with things and very asking why all the time. And after my dad passed away, I was just so angry at, right, God, the universe, whatever that is. Like, how could you, what is it? Why am I here? Like, you're literally just dragging us through the mud. You know, and there's people with much more horrific suffering. There's all kinds of lousy things going on in the world. But regarding death, do you think that we take part of us with us when we go back to that source? Or is it, when you say that bleeds back into that, do you have any semblance of self anymore in terms of like remembering the journey that you were on? Because like, it's funny, one of my fears when I was reading about this, I was like, I don't want to lose the journey that I was on with my dad, for example. Like, I want to see him again. I want to hug him again. I want to hear his voice again. But I would be kind of bummed if that was erased. Like, oh, that wasn't important. You know, like, I feel like that was important. Like you said, the greatest, like, you learn from suffering, you learn things about yourself. And I think it was Saint Teresa of Avila who said, like, the most horrific life on this earth viewed from heaven is like one inconvenient night at a hotel. And I believe that would be true. Like, if you could see like whatever you go through now and then you see like the bliss or whatever of an afterlife or whatever, if that's the case. But do you think that all gets wiped, or do you take that with you? And if it's all part of the one, you have all these lessons, right? Billions of people over billions of years. I mean, does that just a drop in the bucket, like you said, and it's gone? Sorry, Scott.
It is a drop in the bucket, but your question is motivated. And I know why you're asking this question. Everybody asks this question, and I know where they're coming from. And it's incredibly frustrating because the answer is so self-evident and so obvious, and yet it's so hard to communicate. It's so hard to tell people, why the hell are you worrying? It's like you are dreaming, and your dream avatar is extremely worried that the dreamer might wake up. And the dream avatar is going like, oh my God, will I still be myself when I wake up? Will I lose myself? Will I just have the memories of this dream? Because when that guy wakes up, I'm gone. Yeah, it's all true. But after you wake up, then you realize, oh, it was all me.
Mm.
Then you realize that there was never a dream avatar, really. It was only one experience you were having. And after you wake up, it's still you. It was you before, it's still you now. Nobody will shed a tear for the death of the dream avatar. And that's the situation we find ourselves in right now. When you ask, well, will I lose myself? Will there still be a part of me?
Yeah.
And then you die and you go like, oh, all right. What is most difficult for people to reconcile after a psychedelic trip is the following. And very few people put it in words. And it's one of the few things that can be put it in words. The most disconcerting aspect of a psychedelic experience is not only the strangeness. It is the conjunction of strangeness and familiarity. The true profound things, the true profound insights that you have, they are not potent because you just found the answer for the first time. They are potent because you realize that you are remembering the answer. The potency of the insight is that it is a remembrance of what you are, of what has been going on always, and at every second, it was never any different. And you remember. That is the potency. That's the thing that nobody can shake off, because it's not a new insight. Where do the new insights come from? From here, right now, when you're not tripping. That's the novelty territory. That's when new things emerge in the subjectivity of nature, especially when we are confronted with suffering. Otherwise, we just ride the wave of a fun life, all the way to the end. And then at the end, we had a lot of fun and learned nothing. So suffering is a key ingredient. And that's the ingredient for novelty in this state of mind. What you remember when you are less dissociated from your cognitive neighborhood, what you remember is not a new insight, it's a remembrance of what's going on. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not something new you learned. Oh, I remember what's going on now. And you can't even word what's going on. And because you can't word it, you can't bring it back with you. You just know that I remembered what is going on.
Okay.
And I was sure about it, but now I don't know anymore.
Okay. So I was just going to ask you, can you bring that back with you? So no, you don't. But you have this inkling that you understood what was going on. And does that give you peace?
No. It depends on your on what is bringing you anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was a thoughtless materialist, the idea that death is really the end of consciousness was incredibly reassuring, because it gave me certainty that all my problems, all my suffering would guaranteedly come to an end.
Mm.
And by the way, I could bring that end forward anytime I wanted. That was incredibly reassuring. It eliminated what has been historically the greatest fear of humanity throughout 99% of our history, which is the fear of what we will experience after we die.
Mm-hmm.
In Christian language, am I going to go to hell? What's going to happen after I die?
Mm-hmm.
All my references are gone. Everything I'm familiar with is gone.
Mm-hmm.
What will I experience? That greatest fear was used by government regimes throughout history to keep people in line. And materialism in the late 19th century took that off the table. What a fantastic payoff that was.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, it came at great cost. It also took meaning off the table with it. Anxiety and meaning went off the table together. And we were left with having to figure out how to become the Übermensch. That's Nietzsche's word for the moral challenge that was posed on us with the death of God. How do we transcend our own condition? Because meaning is off the table. How do we make meaning now? And then there came Sartre and existentialism, everybody trying to find an answer to that completely artificial question, because meaning is everywhere. So for me, not understanding when I am in this state, but remembering that what is really going on is such that birth and death happen in you, not to you. Remembering that understanding, I don't remember what led to that understanding, but I remember the conclusion. For me, that's a source of anxiety now, because the old fear comes back. I know how painful ego dissolution was until I got the handle of it. Now I'm a pro. I don't mind ego dissolution at all. What crushes me is the return, is the re-entry. When you reconstitute your ego, that feels incredibly claustrophobic. It's like you're going into solitary confinement in a two-dimensional world. It's just crushing. It's overwhelmingly crushing. It takes me 3 weeks to accept life again. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I am afraid of, if a psychedelic trip, which is just partial reduction of dissociation, my brain is still metabolizing a lot. If it can be so unfathomably weird and familiar at the same time, and so intense emotionally, what when there is no brain metabolism anymore?
Yeah, have fun.
So no, that doesn't bring me peace. But if your anxiety is you're afraid of disappearance, you're afraid of total annihilation, that anxiety isn't gone. It's not a thought that comes back to you anymore. That's over. But beware other anxieties that you never thought about.
Yeah, I mean, I'll lay at bed at night, and I think it's gotten worse since I've had kids. For sure, it's gotten worse because I worry about them, the world I brought them in. So there's a whole other set of fears of like, if I'm gone, who's going to take care of them, things like that. I worry about the pain. Like the older you get, like just thinking about all the crap that they're going to have to go through, and I don't want to set them up. I had this conversation with a friend about religion, and I don't want to set them up to believe in something. Because when I first got hit with why is there suffering and all these kind of, because at first your life's good, you have no reason to question things. When it goes bad, you're like, okay, this doesn't make sense. You start analyzing your religion. I was pretty devastated in terms of this feels like a lie to me, like what I've been told about this. What you describe, and I think that's why I was attracted to it. It just feels right. I don't know how to describe it, but it's very mentally stimulating, and that it gels well with so many things and falls in line with so many things. But I lay in bed at night and I think about things getting dark, and it might be kind of some gross feelings to see what happened to my dad. And it bothers me to think that, oh, maybe he was afraid when things were going that way. And it's tough to hold on to, but I think if I were to do what you did and then that's gone, and maybe it would bring up other things, because I've heard about the ego death, and I've heard I don't even know how painful that can be. And like you said, how would that be if it's completely wiped clean? Do you feel like everyone should experience that? Like it would
No.
make no. Who should not?
I'm certainly not one of those who think that psychedelics are a panacea for our social problems.
Oh, okay.
Psychedelics will amplify and reflect that which each person is, and each person is different. So it's not a panacea. I think there are people out there that would not benefit from a psychedelic experience. You have to be at a certain point in your life where some of the right questions have to be asked already. You have to be wondering about certain things already. That's when you are primed and ripe for the experience. And many people who are going around are not. And so the experience will not benefit them. It would just confuse them. It would not make them crazy. It would just confuse the hell out of them, and may lead to dysfunctional behavior, because the ego will try to make sense of all that confusion, and it may come up with dysfunctional narratives that the person would then believe. So I think it takes a certain point in the maturation process to experience that, and you have to be primed for that in certain ways. And who am I to tell you when is the right time? I don't know. I can only share with you how I did it. I was 35. I did a whole lot of research before I did it. I live in a country where psilocybin is illegal, mushrooms. So I went to my doctor. I told him I plan to have a megadose psychedelic trip. Can you check my liver and my heart? So my liver and my heart were checked. And then I did it a little bit at a time. I had several prelude experiences with very small doses, and then a little higher, until I sort of got my bearings on that territory. And then I had my first major trip. And for me, I was primed. I was asking all the right questions. So it was extremely helpful to me. But if you ask me, when did I trip for the last time? It's been years.
Okay. Do you avoid it on purpose?
No. Look, psychedelics are the opposite of addiction. When you come back, even if you have tremendously insightful trip, it's a very hard lesson. The curriculum is extremely hard. It takes discipline to make yourself, put yourself through that again. It takes a lot of discipline, a lot of desire to comprehend, a lot of desire to retain something, to bring something back. A lot of that discipline, that sort of, bullheaded discipline to go through the fire again and bring something back. And at some point, the curriculum sort of comes to an end for you on a certain phase of your life. And then in my case, I had 2 or 3 trips, the last ones, in which during the entire trip, I was like, oh, yeah, been here. Oh, yeah, I remember this. Oh, yeah, that. Yes, I remember that. I've been here, been there. And then you come back, okay, nothing new. And then that happens 3 times in a row, and you don't want to do this anymore until the desire arises in you again. And it's not something that you can plan. It's something that arises naturally. In me, it didn't arise yet again. Maybe I'm flirting with that idea again.
Okay.
But although you don't bring much back, you bring more than you think you do. And it builds up. And at some point, you have recalibrated your life so much. You have recalibrated your attitude so much. You connected your head back to your heart. You have empathy again. You recovered your humanity. You recovered your past. Your child self is back within the distance of the horizon. It's not beyond the horizon anymore. You've become a lot more patient and kind towards yourself, even your child self. You start some hobbies that satisfy your natural self as opposed to your adaptive self. You put your adaptive self in perspective and you remember what your natural self is. These subtle things that are not spectacular insights, but they build up over time. And then you find solid footing in your life. And you start just allowing nature to do through you whatever nature wants to do through you in this state of mind, because this is the novelty space. The non-dissociated space, or the less dissociated space, is the space of remembrance. And there's a lot of weird stuff to remember. That's why it's so disconcerting. But that's not the space of novelty. If it were, we would still be there. This is the space of novelty. Nature is carving out novelty out of this crappy condition, the human condition. That's the sacrifice. That's the life of sacrifice. It's here. And once that sinks into you, into your chest area, not only your head, it's not only conceptual, but something that, resonates with your whole being, it becomes so much easier to just put up with it. And not maybe you don't do that joyfully because it's a tough road, but you do that willingly. And there is always that thought in your mind, home is coming. You never left, but the recognition of home is coming. And it's mighty weird and mighty familiar at the same time.
So for you, how do you, when you are confronted with suffering, do you view it as a learning experience, a way to appreciate more of the other side? I mean, how do you kind of tackle that and not get bogged down by it? Like whether it's happening to you or a friend, or you see someone die, or how are you handling that in light of what you think?
I don't romanticize suffering. I don't go like, oh, suffering is our great gift from God. I don't go that way. I think there is a lot of senseless and avoidable suffering in life. I think especially suffering that we impose gratuitously on ourselves. We torture ourselves incredibly. We are self-torturing machines. It's amazing the ability of human beings to torture themselves unnecessarily all the time. I don't glorify that. I don't romanticize that, because I think value judgment can only be passed in nature by metacognitive beings such as we are. I don't think the divine mind in its primordial state is metacognitive. It doesn't know what's good, what's bad. It doesn't know what's right, what's wrong. It's spontaneous. It's a spontaneous, relatively simple mind in that sense. So it's up to us to look at what's happening around in nature, to look at the earthworms being cut alive into pieces by the ants in my lawn, to look at that and say, we could do it better. It could be better. It's our responsibility to pass that value judgment. So having made this disclaimer, I will also tell you a fact. Not one book or article of value that I have written was written in the absence of suffering. It is suffering that pokes and prods you forward, that makes you stop on your tracks and ask the deep questions. Ask the whys, or ask, is this how things should be? Or what is going on? And who am I? Why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to them? These questions you only ask when a power greater than you stops you on your tracks and makes you suffer. Because otherwise, you just skate away through the ice of life, having fun. And one day, death comes, and then you start thinking, oh, it's too late, it's over. You've gone through this fear of novelty without producing much. So,
would you say that suffering is a necessity then?
Clearly, isn't it?
By design?
Spontaneously so, not by premeditated design, because I don't think nature is premeditating anything.
Okay. Except
through us. Or maybe, I don't know if there are metacognitive ETs somewhere in the neighborhood of Alpha Centauri. I don't know. There may be, but as far as we know, we are the only great natural experiment in self-reflection, in metacognition. We are it. We are the eyes through which God can contemplate itself and tell itself, why am I doing this to myself? Or I should do that to myself because that's positive, that's functional, or no, that's unnecessary, that causes unnecessary suffering and it's dysfunctional. But spontaneously as it may be, obviously, I think it's an empirical fact, suffering is a necessary ingredient for insight. If you don't suffer, you just don't ask the big questions. You just don't stop in your tracks. You go into a sort of autopilot of fun in your life, and you don't see below the surface.
That's so true.
It's just how it is. It's how mind is. Suffering is the thing that stops mind on its tracks and forces it to contemplate itself and the space around itself. Without it, there wouldn't be insight. There wouldn't be this field of novelty. That said, again, I don't glorify suffering. I think suffering is inevitable. So what suffering comes and you can't avoid, take it gladly because it has a payoff. But don't put yourself through more suffering voluntarily. I wouldn't do that, if you know what I mean. No, let nature do its thing. And when the suffering comes, trust that there is a payoff to that. Your life is in sacrifice, is sacrifice. Sacrifice means to render sacred, to make sacred. That suffering will come. It's unavoidable. You don't need to work towards it. You don't need to trigger it. Just relax. It's going to come. When it comes, then take the payoff. Pay attention to what it does to you. Remember what insights you have when you are in the throes of suffering. Think about what comes to your mind self-reflectively when you are in the throes of suffering. Take the payoff, but don't force the suffering, because we do that so much. We force so much unnecessary suffering. Suffering comes and we learn a lot from it. And then we don't need that suffering anymore, but we become so addicted to it. It becomes such a built-in part of ourselves that we go on suffering. And then you gain nothing from that anymore. You already learned everything you had to learn from it, but we go on suffering. And that kind of suffering, I would do anything that I could to stop that. And it is recognizable when the payoff stops. Not immediately, but after a while, you realize I'm going in loops. All of these thoughts, I've had them before. All of these learnings, all of these insights, I've had them already. They keep on coming back. And that suffering becomes sterile suffering, because we are largely mechanical in our ways of thinking. We become habituated to a certain way of cognizing things. And when suffering gets built into that, it's difficult to let it go once it has served its purpose. Mm-hmm. But I think we should try. There's no gratuitous suffering with me now.
Would you say you're thankful when it comes to you? Or, because people can always picture the Zen meditative master or the person who's experienced, altered states of consciousness, and they're much more welcoming of those experiences. Or would you say you're in that camp?
I am grateful to it after the fact, after it has done its job. My father died, I was 12. And that threw my world totally upside down. I had no ground to stand. There was a lot of suffering there for years. Today I look back and I know I wouldn't have matured the way I did. I wouldn't be where I am today. And I'm very grateful for being where I am today. Had that not happened, my father checked out exactly when he needed to check out to put me through a great initiation. And his life was complete. I know it was, because he told me that, still in life. So I'm grateful to that in hindsight. But if that magnitude of shit would come back to my life, I wouldn't be grateful to it as it's happening. No. In the back of my mind, I would know that eventually I will be grateful even for this. But in the throes of the suffering, no, I'm not a saint, man. No. There is a saint in the back of my mind telling me, you will be grateful for this. And I go like, yeah, I know, but I'm kicking and screaming still.
Well, I think you're light years ahead of so many people, including myself, to even have that voice in the back of your head that you're able to tell yourself that. Because in the moment, I'm still so angry or still so upset about it. And it's my dad passed away in 2020, so it's been 2 years. But I have moments where I'm just like, I don't know. I feel like there's no good answer, and that can be its own spiral down into kind of a dark place. And it's been really hard to kind of have those talks with my kids. My kids will ask, I'll be like, God and stuff. And it's just like, how do I explain this to where, and I've kind of had to alter some of the things that I grew up with, because I feel like if my daughter gets old enough and she's getting older where she asks the questions like, oh, where do you go when you die? What happens with this? What happened with that? So now I'm kind of faced with, okay, how am I answering these questions? Because I can't even be sure about what happened to my dad, what happened to her grandpa, and I say heaven, I say this, the generic, don't traumatize your child answers.
I think those answers are true. Is your father gone? No. Whatever nature does once, it does forever, because what's really going on is not inside time. Will you meet your father again? Yes, and it will be the surprise of your life, because you then see what your father was always. Mm. And that, wait for that one. I'm not going to spoil the fun. Yeah, I'm not going to tell you in advance. But you will know your father better than you could ever have known him in life. And that will floor you. And you will have a galactic laugh. It's anyway.
Would you say that's similar to when people say, "Oh, I had a life experience and I saw the perspective of every single thing that I interacted with from both sides, because you are all one thing"?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You will know your father by being your father, and you go like, "Haha, that's the cosmic joke."
Man.
But nothing is lost. Nothing is ever lost. If you ask me now, can I write a technical paper in analytic philosophy proving that? No. The best I could do is to show that in physics, information tends to be retained, even on the edge of a black hole, which is like amazing. But that would be the physics language to say that. But my personal way to relate to nature is based on the recognition that nothing, absolutely nothing, is ever lost. It's just we're just talking about modalities of experience of the whole, which may not feel like the whole because it's a modality of experience. But it cannot possibly be lost. It doesn't work that way. There is nowhere else for it to be lost into. I don't know whether this makes any sense to you.
Does.
So I think with children, how can you go to the degree of sophistication we are using in this conversation? Mm-hmm. So you have to tell them things that are true in spirit, in essence, because children don't interpret things literally. Literal interpretation is something of the Western conceptual mind. It's a recent thing in the history of mankind. The mind operates by analogy. So when we say time's a river, what we mean is not that time is literally a river. What we say is there is something about time that is the same as something about the river. And that's all we can say. Now, when we came up with concepts like flow, and now we can say, well, time literally flows. Yeah, but before the concept of flow, all you could do is to say time is a river. Yeah. Is time a river? No. But is time a river? Yeah, yes. Yeah. You see what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
So children think as in the terms of time is a river. So I think it's perfectly okay. I mean, it would be a lie if you told your children your grandpa is no more. That's the lie.
Yeah.
That's it. Why would you expose your children to a dysfunctional lie? I mean, no.
No, I agree.
I wouldn't do that. I don't have children by choice, but I wouldn't do that.
No, that makes perfect sense. I wanted to talk about time because you've mentioned that a couple of times now. Would you say that this mind is outside of space and time? And then when we talk about evolution, billions of years, this thing's been evolving, or here, does it have a beginning and an end? And I know I'm going to get into physics, the Big Bang, multiverse, like what with materialism, what that's saying. How does this all fit together in terms of...
Oh, even in physics today, we got rid of time as a fundamental scaffolding of the universe. And loop quantum gravity shows that time is derivative. There are physicists who have written books like The End of Time by Julian Barbour, in which they rewrote all the equations of physics without time, and everything falls together. Everything still closes up.
Okay.
We know Kant was the first in the West to say that time and space are categories of human perception. Perception are like a set of dials on a dashboard, and those little needles of the dashboard of an airplane telling you, air humidity, wind speed, and pressure, all those little needles moving around the dials. Time and space are the scales of the dials where the needles move. So they are the paradigm of the dashboard. The world we perceive, the physical world we see, is a dashboard. We don't have a transparent window to see the world as it is. All we have are sensors the two retinas, the two eardrums, the surface of the skin, the surface of the tongue, the inner lining of the nose. These are our airplane sensors. They measure the world. And then they present those measurements to us in a way that facilitates our survival. Just like in an airplane, what the sensors of the airplane measure are displayed on the dials of the dashboard, right? So perception, the physical world, is the dashboard. It's not the world as it is. It's not the thing measured. It's the result of a measurement. It's a representation of important things about the world for us to survive. We are pilots flying by instruments. And pilots can fly by instruments. They don't need a transparent windshield. They can fly by instruments. The physical world is the dashboard. It is the instrumentation. We fly by instruments. Physicality is not the world as it is in itself. And there are a host of arguments for that. Now, time and space are the scaffolding, the dimensions of the dashboard. They are the paradigm of the dashboard, not the paradigm of the thing measured. And what time and space do is they allow us to cognize the world in discrete bytes, because we just don't have the cognitive apparatus to cognize everything that there is. It's cognitive overload. You fry your head. So we have to sort of chop it off there is a word in Dutch now, hapbaar, that I don't know how to translate in English. Chop it off in little pieces that you can swallow it all at once.
Okay.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's what time and space do. They chop reality off so we can cognize it without cognitive overload. But what is really going on is absolutely certainly not in time and space. And physics is coming around to that exact same conclusion. And so does the neuroscience of time perception. It's coming to that same conclusion. Time is totally relative. Since Einstein, we know that, but it's relative in even more ways than Einstein thought it was. Whatever is reality, it's outside time, which doesn't mean that it's happening now, because now is a concept in time. Doesn't mean it has already happened. No, that's a concept in time. We cannot talk about something outside time because space and time are built into the language. You can only be acquainted with it. And if you are, you know what I'm talking about. And if you're not, then, good luck. But there are very good reasons to take this as a truth, that time and space are not fundamental. So the very concept of loss, something that was and is no more, that only makes sense in the dashboard paradigm. It doesn't make sense in reality as it is. The sky outside the airplane that the airplane sensors are actually measuring. That's time-bound thinking, which is the only thinking we have, because our entire rationality, the intellect, has evolved based on the parameters of the dashboard, because all we have is the dashboard. So everything has evolved to speak the language of the dashboard, under the paradigm of the dashboard. But the dashboard is not the world. The dashboard is just the dashboard, okay? And it's important. You ignore it, you die.
Yeah.
Like an airplane pilot, you don't look at the dials, you crash. So let's take it seriously, but keep in mind that it is just the dashboard. That's all there is to it.
So when you say, like, we've evolved through our perceptions to survive, not necessarily to know the truth or see the truth as it is in front of us, and we see things like black holes and stars, and right, if you're someone raised in materialism and you're not a science, right? A lot of people like myself who just like hear the scientists on the news or hear people talking about, oh, we're close to figuring out everything, and this is just, it is what you see. If you could get rid of that boundary, do you think it's similar to when you're doing like a psychedelic trip or a near-death experience? And since I've never done that, when people talk about lights and like crazy, visually, what would be the difference between I'm seeing a black hole and like telescopes and stars, and now I've crossed the boundary?
Two comments. The first one, I'm not saying that what we see is untrue. For the same reason that the pilot would never look at the dashboard and say, these dials are false. No. They are presenting to you true information about the true world. The point is only that the dashboard is not the world. It's not false. It's not deceiving you. It's the dashboard of an airplane deceiving the pilot. It is not. On the contrary, It's useful. It's presenting information in just the format that the pilot can make sense of and fly correctly without killing anyone. So the dashboard is not untrue. It's not a deception. It's not false. It's not a simulation. For the same reason that the dashboard is not untrue, it's not a deception, it's not false, it's not a simulation. But it is not the world. It's just the dashboard. You see what I'm trying to... It's so simple. It's difficult to say it.
Yeah, no, I understand.
So simple it is.
Yeah.
So that's the first comment. The other comment about, what is the experience of the world behind the dashboard?
Mm-hmm.
An easy answer to that is to say, for as long as we are alive, we only have the dashboard. Unless you almost die, like in an NDE, or if you force down your brain activity to a level that simulates death, like in a psychedelic experience. And then people have an experience of more direct acquaintance with the world as it actually is, like you stick your head out of the airplane. So you see what's being measured as opposed to seeing the dials.
Mm-hmm.
That's on the one hand. But on the other hand, you bring your own baggage to whatever you are experiencing. So that direct experience of the world is not neutral. It is not pure, because you will wrap a narrative around that because of your need to tell yourself what's going on. And you will always bring your baggage to it, your references, your metaphors, the things and symbols that are evocative to you. So if a Hindu has an NDE, he will meet Krishna. If a Christian has an NDE, he will meet Jesus. If an atheist has an NDE, he will meet his dead grandfather. So which one is true? Is it Krishna? Is it Jesus? Or is it the grandfather? The answer is none of them or all of them, depending on how you look at it. They are all symbolic dressings for an experience that in and of itself cannot be described in words. So you always will dress it up. Even during the experience, you will be telling yourself what you are experiencing, and then you will project your own symbolic baggage onto that experience. But the pure and true, uncontaminated experience is not something you could attach a word to. It's a feeling. It's pure endogenous cognition, without shapes, without forms, without colors, without any of the parameters of the dashboard. In other words, without any physical parameters, because physicality is the dashboard. Remember, you are now looking behind the dashboard, but the only language you have to tell yourself what you're experiencing is the language of the dashboard. So even though you're sticking your head outside the airplane, you will project the dashboard on that, because that's all you've learned.
Okay.
You will tell yourself a story in terms of the parameters of the dashboard. And that's the crucial difference. I think the core of the NDE is the world as it is in itself. Because by almost dying, you have almost become the world again, as opposed to observing the world. Psychedelic experience, the same, although to a lesser degree. You push down your brain activity so much that your dissociation is so much lower, the boundary is so porous, that you become directly acquainted with your cognitive neighborhood, but you will project your language onto it in order to tell yourself what it is. So your symbolic baggage will be projected immediately and dress up the pure endogenous cognition that is the world. You would dress it up with your symbolic baggage so you can tell yourself and get a grip and say, oh, this is what's going on right now.
I had a question about mathematics, because that's sold to like the general public as this is how, like the language of the universe, this is how we find out the truth. For someone who's not a mathematician, is that just saying? Is that just measuring what we perceive through our perceptions about, and that's just, I guess, like you did the dashboard analogy, that's just showing us how things are behaving? Is that a way of looking at it? Because it's like, I don't know. How do you view mathematics in terms of this reality?
Mathematics is vexing because on the one hand, it's obviously something we come up with. It's not out there. We think it out. We think into existence. And on the other hand, obviously, it's not something we just think into existence. Because a mathematician in Russia who never spoke to a mathematician in the US, they both may come and arrive at the same conclusion. So that conclusion was not only in their individual minds, obviously, right?
Yeah.
And yet it was not in the world, obviously, because it's just something that happens in mind. How do you reconcile this vexing contradiction? It's just a contradiction on the surface. I think what's happening is the following. There was a physicist called Eugene Wigner who wrote a paper in the 1960s talking about the miracle of mathematics describing the world, the physical world, so accurately. Because there is no reason why that should be the case. Why should our logical intuitions match perfectly what nature is doing? If you think about it, this is discombobulating. Why would it be my arbitrary logical intuitions, what I consider to be logical in terms of 2 + 2 is 4, and if A is B and B is C, then A is C. Why should all that mental stuff here describe what is out there so perfectly? Well, this is only discombobulating by materialism, because materialism is the only metaphysics that tells you there is mind in here, and there is something out there that isn't mind. And then Wigner is right. Mathematics is a miracle, because how could mental intuitions apply to the non-mental world out there? It's a miracle. He uses the word miracle 12 times in a physics paper. Now, it's the physics paper in history that has the word miracle repeated most often. I counted, which tells you something about me.
Yeah.
What's happening is the following. There is only mind, and it's the same mind in you and out there. Therefore, your deepest archetypal logical intuitions are the same logical intuitions that underlie the world out there. And that's why mathematics is both mental and not individual. Mathematics is mental, but it's not only in your mind or my mind or the mathematician's minds. It is in the mind of nature. And that's why mathematics, although mental, is not individual. And that's why the mathematician in the US and the mathematician in Russia can arrive at the exact same conclusion without having ever talked to one another, because they're both tapping into transpersonal archetypes of the mind of nature. The very scaffolding of how mental processes unfold, the basic templates of how the mind of nature operates and behaves. When you tap into that as a mathematician, you are tapping into a transpersonal level of mind, a level that's not only your own personal idiosyncrasies, your opinions, your prejudices, your favoritisms. No, you're tapping into something that is so primordial, so low at the root of mind, that at that level of nature, there is no you and no another anymore. It's only the one mind of nature, the basic scaffolding, the primary foundational level of the mind of nature, which we can tap into because you're part of it. That scaffolding is collective. We are all rooted into it. So that's my interpretation of mathematics. Mathematics are the basic thought templates of the divine mind, if you want to speak religious language.
Okay.
It's a way for a human mind to tap into the very basic templates of thought of the mind of nature. And of course, then nature unfolds according to those templates, because nature is a mind. And physicality is just the dashboard representation of what that mind is doing outside the airplane.
Okay. Yeah, you see that sometimes with theologians or people who have mathematics backgrounds. They'd be like, oh, mathematics is the language of God, or they'll try to use it in that sense.
Oh, it goes back to Plato.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I haven't read that since high school. So would you say, is there a purpose to mind's evolution? Is there an end to this? Or is this going to continue on for billions of years in the future, for you to use a time reference, as it has?
Yeah, okay. Speaking the language of time.
Yeah.
There's no beginning and there is no end in reality. That's, the scale of the dials on the dashboard don't apply to the sky outside the airplane. But speaking the language of the dashboard, is there a telos? That's what you're asking. Is there an ultimate purpose? an ultimate meaning in the sense of something that is being aimed at, like an attractor,
Mm-hmm.
like the desire for happiness defines the direction of your life.
Mm.
Whatever you try to do, you're aiming at that telos. I want to be happy. Until you become an adult, and then it's not about your happiness anymore at all. Unfortunately, there are very few adults in our culture, even amongst the septuagenarians. There are very few adults, because we don't have a recipe for adulthood. We only have a guide for childhood. Anyway, yes, I think there is that cosmic aim, that cosmic telos, and I think, to put in very urban language, is that God's trying to get a grip on itself. It is a spontaneous mind, just like Yahweh in the Old Testament. And it needs a channel, self-reflect channel, to get a grip on itself. Because when we don't have a grip on ourselves, when we are at the mercy of our emotions and our whims, we say we lost ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
When you're out of control, when your emotions are taking you left and right like a leaf in a tsunami, we say, I don't have a grip on myself, and it feels bad. You're reacting spontaneously. You're behaving spontaneously. And we say, well, get a grip, because you will suffer.
Mm-hmm.
And we suffer. When we are at the mercy of the spontaneous activity of mind, we suffer a lot. And we try to get a grip. And that grip can only come through thinking about our own thoughts, contemplating our own emotions, which we call self-reflection, metacognition, explicit introspection, many names for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what the mind of nature is trying to get. And the game of life is a sort of a instinctive attempt to get that. And lo and behold, there is an example of eyes in nature that are self-reflective, our eyes. And it seems that nature has seized on that, because life pops everywhere. It can conceivably pop. There seems to be a great drive in nature towards life, because it seems to be the carrier of self-reflection, the only game in town to allow the divine mind to get a grip on itself and suffer less. And it's all in religious language. The Old Testament, Job, as a little self-reflective mind confronting God for all the suffering God put him through, even though he was a righteous man, and getting the audience with that instinctive mind that goes on a rant about, being the power behind the storms and whatever. And then the New Testament, in which the divine mind incarnates and becomes man. Mm-hmm. And suffers on the cross. Mm-hmm. So Jesus can tell his father, which is him, because his father is him. So Jesus can tell his father, look, it doesn't feel good, all right? and that's a great development in the history of life and of the universal mind, which is captured right there. In the New Testament, it's a great development. God finally looked through the eyes of man and suffered. And it cleared our sins. Oh, what the symbolism of that. I mean, it has no depth. It's endless. It's a shame religion is turned into a little literal story.
I know. You can hear people like yourself when you start drawing parallels and like looking at things symbolically. It's like so rich, but then you have just like people reading line for line. Yeah. And it's just like, And
it's endless. No, let me go a little bit more. God in the Old Testament is morally neutral. He kills, he's cruel. Look at what he did to Job. Yeah. In the beginning of the New Testament, he's still cruel. Look at what he does to his son. But at the end, before Revelations, which is a book that probably shouldn't be in the Bible, there was debate about whether that book should be there. Mm-hmm. But anyway, before Revelations, but after the Passion, God becomes the summum bonum. he becomes only good.
Mm.
Think about that. It took seeing the world through the eyes of self-reflection and suffering to become good. Because before you don't know what you're doing, so you put Job through shit because you're spontaneous.
That's really, that's something to think about.
Christianity is just bottomless in symbolic meaning. It's just incredible stuff. It took almost 400 years to get to that point. But wow, it's just incredible stuff.
So do you think it's good to have religion? There's so much negativity toward religion these days and how it, poisons everything, especially if you talk to atheists. There'll be very certain ones, the public celebrity ones are very strong about their condemnation of it. Do you think it's beneficial to have that scaffolding in your life? Like, I know you can, I feel like you could approach it your way and be totally fine. But if people are more familiar with, hey, I was raised this way, this is a good scaffolding, yes or no to you?
If I just say yes or no.
No. You give me some details. Yeah, you don't have, it's not black and white, I'm sure.
Look, let me first make an observation. What Putin is doing is not because Father Cyril will absolve him of his sins and open the pearly gates of heaven for him, right? So it has nothing to do with religion, what's happening right now. So let's remember that.
Yeah.
What passes for religion today is not religion. What passes for religion today is an infantile, puerile attempt to control people by telling little moral stories and hitting them in the head with a book of moral code. That's not religion. You can derive an ethical code from religion, but religion is not that ethical code. And what we've done, we've reduced religion to a moral code. Religion now is how to behave properly and not to commit sins. Well, it's no wonder that it's in decadence, because you took the soul out of religion and you're selling an empty package. An empty package that hurts. Nobody will go to church on Sunday just to be beaten up.
Yeah.
And tell mea culpa, mea culpa, mea culpa, and come out feeling bad.
Yeah.
Who will do that? Right?
Yeah.
Is that religion? No, that's not religion. The moral codes are not religion. The sermon is not religion. The rules about abortion and not abortion, it's not religion. Maybe these are things that you can derive from religion, but religion is a relationship with transcendence. And that's what we lost. So if you ask me what religion is, from the Latin religare, to reconnect with what's transcendent, to reconnect to our own transcendent roots, like the mathematician does, but in a much broader sense, if that's what we mean by religion, it's not only positive, it's the blood of life. How can you do without it? We are not doing well without it, are we?
Yeah.
We're not doing well at all. We got rid of the fear of death by pretending that death is the end, but we lost all meaning. So now we are plagued by anxiety, depression, ennui, and existential terror. It's not fun. This is not working out well. We think life is about buying the next pair of shoes. This is not working out. It's not working out.
So you think society is in a much worse place because of the absence of religion, and that seems like it's going to continue. You don't really see, less and less people are going to church, less and less people identify as religious. It's more like spirituality and what makes you feel.
Religious institutions are not helping.
Yeah.
Like the Vatican doesn't have much of a platform anymore. People don't pay attention to what they are saying, but when they do get a platform, what they choose to say is, gays and lesbians shouldn't marry. Bloody hell, of all the things you could say in this critical juncture of the human story, you choose to say that? And that's the religion of love. That's the religion of Jesus? Really? Look, I'm not advocating going back to a time that never was, because religious institutions were never really true to religion. Look at what motivated the Reformation, what motivated Luther. Mm-hmm. Priests were selling indulgences to get rich and selling people a piece of paper telling them you have a plot in hell. It's a great real estate investment. Come on.
Yeah.
So what I'm advocating is for something that perhaps never happened, with one exception. And now I'm going to be crucified for what I'm about to say now. There is one religion that preserves some vitality, and that's Islam. But that can also go terribly wrong. And I need not explain it any further.
What about it do you feel have they held on to? What's the key there for Islam over others?
They didn't separate religion from life.
Okay.
They never made that split. They never compartmentalized religion as something you do on Sunday morning. And they have kept alive the key fundamental point of religion, which is ego transcendence. And they do that by 5 times a day, a call to prayer that makes you prostrate yourself to something bigger than you and recognize that your life is not about you, but about something bigger than you. And we are completely alienated from that attitude to life, to nature. And they are not. You could be cynical and say, well, they are more vital because they are more recent. Mm-hmm. Maybe, but it's been 1,400 years.
Yeah.
You know? It's been a little while. It's not like it happened yesterday. I think the key move they made, or rather, the wrong move they didn't make, was to separate religion from life. Look, I'm not saying that you shouldn't separate religion from state. That's something else.
Yes.
What they didn't do was separate religion from life. And by the way, they also didn't quite separate it from the state in some places. And that may have gone wrong. It doesn't work quite well, because then what you get is the particular interpretation of religion of some people who happen to be in power become applied to everybody else. And that destroys religion. Religion has to be a personal relationship with transcendence through the means of liturgy, through the means of ritual and scripture. And that's lost even in the Islamic world. But if you compare all religions and their vitality in the world today, whoa, Islam is far and out more vital. And I think it has to do with their not having split religion from the rest of life. They did not compartmentalize religion for the Sunday morning sermon.
Yeah.
It permeates their day every day. There are constant reminders of that. And yeah, their vitality may have something to do with that. So if we were not the insecure culture that we are, we would take a lesson from that. We would look at our more vital neighbors and say, oh, where have we gone wrong? Because they don't have a total epidemic of depression and anxiety like we have. And the cynics would say, well, it's because they have lots of social problems, so they don't have time for existential questions. Maybe. But I think it's more than that. I don't think they have to confront a nihilistic perspective into the world every day, from the moment they open up their eyes in the morning to the moment they close their eyes in the evening. They do not have to confront that false monster of nihilism. So they can even put up with incredible social problems, because deep inside they maintain that flame alive, that this is all for something. No, Allah is putting us through this for a reason. And we don't even need to understand it, because Allah is much greater than we are. The only appropriate attitude towards transcendence is to prostrate yourself and not try to understand, fail, and then say, well, therefore, if I can't understand the meaning of it all, then there is no meaning. That's what we do.
Yeah.
And it's killing us.
Do you think the rise of science, and not to be anti-science, because obviously that serves a purpose, but in the West has kind of undercut the legs of religion? And for a lot of people, there's no point, there's no reason. You don't need to believe in that God up there, that he doesn't exist.
It shouldn't have, because both are complementary. But it has. In practice, it has. Because we make some very primary, simple mistakes. Look at the many ways. I'll mention 2 ways in which we deceive ourselves regarding the relationship of science and religion. One way we deceive ourselves is the following. It's a major psychological move at a civilization level. We are anxious. We know nature is much more powerful than we are, and it can kill us. and can make us suffer. A tornado can come, destroy our houses, throw you 50 meters up in the air, or cancer can come. Part of nature, cancer can come, and you know all about that. So we are afraid. So what do? Instead of the mature approach, which is, my life is not about me. And the only reason to be fearful is if I think that my life is about me. So if something impacts me negatively, then my life lost its meaning. Wrong thinking. Your life's not about you, has never been. You're part of nature. You are just a little segment, a subset of the great show that nature is performing. It's not about you. And you don't need to understand what it's about. You're never going to understand. You're a monkey walking around a little rock, hurtling around infinite space. And you have an intellect for only 30,000 years yesterday. How the hell are you going to figure out what this is all about? So that's supremely arrogant, but we make that mistake, and then we make the next mistake. Because I feel afraid, I need to control nature. Mm. And therefore, science will give me that control so I can reinforce and protect my ego and have a way to deal with my anxiety. Well, that didn't work quite well, did we? We still die of cancer, you know. Shit still happens. Mm-hmm. But it worked more or less. That it did. And so it gave us an impulse, an impetus to persist on that path that will never lead to a solution, but will do us well enough that we feel motivated to pursue it. That's one first mistake. The other mistake was to mistake the ability to play the game with the ability to understand what's going on. I'll give you a metaphor. Suppose you're a 5-year-old kid. Do you have a son or a daughter 5 years old?
Well, yeah, my daughter's 5 and then 2 sons below that.
Do they play computer games?
They try a lot. Yeah. Always
Do they play it well?
Sometimes, depending on the game. But okay. a lot of times, no, you have to help them or show them.
Okay, so imagine a 5-year-old kid that is world champion on a computer game. World champion, plays it very well. These exist. Mm-hmm. These exist. I'm not asking you to imagine something that never happened. Yeah. No, they exist. I almost was one of them with my Atari 2600.
Oh, Atari. Nice.
I could play Missile Command until the chickens came to roost. My mother would have to turn it off because I wouldn't be defeated in that game. So imagine a 5-year-old kid, world champion in a game. Does the kid know what the game is? Mm-hmm. What the hardware and the electronics and all the software, what everything that's going on? No. Yeah. The kid has no idea what the game is, but the kid knows how to play the game well. And the way the kid plays the game well is by using a convenient fiction, which has nothing to do with what's actually going on, but the game behaves as though that convenient fiction were true. And that's why the fiction is convenient. And the fiction is the following. There is a little man inside the phone, and he has a gun and he shoots. And if I get him to shoot here, here, and there, I score points. Is that what's going on? Is there a little man inside the phone with a gun shooting around? No. There is no little man. There is no gun. Nothing's being shot. There's nothing. There's nothing like that going on. But the game behaves as though there were a little man in the phone shooting around. So on the basis of that convenient fiction, you are world champion. That is science and technology. We have a convenient fiction about how nature behaves, and nature behaves as though that fiction were true, close enough that we can develop technology by exploring that convenient fiction and the implications of that convenient fiction. So we develop technology, and lo and behold, technology works, all right? It works. Therefore, we must really understand what's going on. No, that's the error. You see, the kid doesn't need to understand what's going on to be world champion in the game. Mm-hmm. We don't need to understand what's going on to have fantastic working technology. That's the third way in which we deceive ourselves. And that's why we delude ourselves thinking that science gives us an understanding of what's going on. It doesn't. It allows us to predict what nature will do next on the basis of convenient fictions. The next thing is, it makes us think that we can grab control and alleviate our anxiety. No, it doesn't do that either. Look at us. Our technology is fantastic, but until the singularity comes, we are not gods. We don't have absolute control of everything that's going on. And I dare say we will never have.
Okay.
That will never happen. That's the second way in which we deceive ourselves. But a sincere Muslim doesn't deceive himself in this second way, because he knows his life is not about him. It's not about whether he's happy or unhappy, whether he's suffering or not suffering. It's not about him. He is a vehicle, a means to something else, a means to an end. And the irony, the most cruel thing is that if you sincerely understand this, if you sincerely understand that your life is not about you, that it's not about your happiness, then you're happy. But the problem is, if I say this, people go like, oh, then the way for me to be happy is to pretend that I'm not interested in being happy. No, it is not going to work that way. It only works if you truly understand with your whole body that your life is not about you, that in a sense, your life is sacrificial. It's a means to an end. Nature is trying to do something through you, and your only choice is you resist it or you let it go. That's all there is to it. It's the only choice you can ever make in your life, is to resist what nature is trying to do through you, or you let it go and you pay attention. You try to synchronize your radio to that carrier wave so you can make it easier for yourself and nature to do what needs to be done, for whatever needs to happen. The moment you do that, you become a slave. But it's also the moment when you, for the first time, become free. Because the tyranny of believing that your life is about you is overwhelming. You are the worst master for the slave that you are. It's a tyranny that has no end. It never stops. And it's incredibly claustrophobic, because if you think your life is about you, this tiny little piece of a thing running around a rock, hurtling through space, if you think that's what your life is about, you are doomed. The whole thing becomes so claustrophobic, small, meaningless, senseless. Because even if you get to be happy, imagine you succeed, you're happy. And so what? There is no meaning in that either. And people who get there realize that. That's why so many rich, famous people commit suicide, because that's the worst that's the worst thing to achieve. Because that's the moment when you realize everything you've ever tried to achieve were ghosts, and you run your hands through it and you grab on nothing. There's nothing there. And then it's too late. You spent your life on that already. And then they kill themselves.
That's put so well. I feel like you're describing me when I lay down on my bed at night.
You're a young man.
Well, I'm trying to control everything. I'm trying if I can exert my control on everything, it'll be okay. I do that all the time. And that's where the fear, I think, comes from, and the anxiety, because I maybe know I can't. You
think you're the master of your life.
Yeah.
And that puts a responsibility on your shoulders that no human being can bear. No human being can bear the cosmic responsibility of meaning. It is impossible. But by and large, we're all trying it. And we're failing. Surprise, surprise. You're not Titan. You're not trying to hold the world on your shoulders. It's not going to work. You're going to fall. And we fall. But we don't know any other recipe. So we keep on redoing that. We keep on trying again, dust yourself up, rise again. And that's the heroic way to go about through life. No, it's a stupid way to go about life, because you're fighting a fight that you can't win. So why are you going to do that? Just stop, shut up, feel what's happening through you, pay attention to what's happening in your inner life, and then be a friend of nature. And then what will happen is you will no longer be the master. You'll be the slave, but you will not bear responsibility. You are not responsible for whether humanity will destroy itself in 100 years or not. All you're responsible for is to do your part. And all you need to do that is to allow yourself to go where nature wants you to go. It's the easiest thing in the world. And it will take away so much pressure. But we can only understand that, historically speaking, through religion, as Islam still does. And Catholicism once did, through the idea of a life of sacrifice, a life that is about serving God, not you. And you serve God by serving others, not you. So everything becomes broad and spacious. You no longer take yourself that seriously, because if you suffer, yeah, so what? It's about all the rest. So that you suffer, oh, it's okay. It's all right.
Such a good outlook. It's such a good outlook. But it's so hard.
It's like you stick your head out of a hole in the ground and you see the horizon for the first time in your life. It's Jesus. Now you take a fresh breath of air for the first time. But you only do that if you realize that you're not the master, you're the slave. It's the freedom of the slave. It's the most far-reaching freedom conceivable. But we lost religion. We think religion is a moral code.
Yeah.
We think religion is about guilt and sin and how to be righteous. And geez.
Well, do you think there's any way you can get back to that, though, in present day technology and everything, the rat race that life is? You think that's possible to get back to that?
Yeah. It would take world wars still.
Oh, really?
But, I think. And I was more optimistic until the 23rd of February, 2022.
Yeah.
And then I saw happening in Europe, my continent, in a place that I can reach after I drive 1.5 days. And I saw something happening again that I was convinced would not happen anymore because we had learned enough. But no, we learned, but not enough.
Oh, wasn't that shocking?
And it's happening again.
When it happened, I was just like, what the hell is this? This is like, I thought we were doing this during the Cold War, the threat of nukes again. Now we're doing invasions again by major superpowers. Like, what is happening? Like, and I was barely around for the 80s where it was like, Cold War threats to that. But I was like, it was like a blow to how I perceive the world. Like, if that can happen, well, hell yeah, another world war can happen.
If this had happened in another phase of my life, in a phase in which I had not yet understood what I just told you about, my life not being about me, your life not being about you, nobody's life being about them. If I hadn't understood that yet, I was already in a very bad place from the 24th of February this year, but I think I would be in an even worse place in some sense. On the other hand, I was also less empathic than I am now. Empathy has grown a lot as I matured, as I grew up. Mm-hmm. So maybe that would have compensated for that. But we will get there, but it takes a lot longer than even the most pessimistic ones amongst us, I think, believe. We need repeat lessons until something gets really etched into the foundational level of mind. Until it gets there, we have to go through it again and again. Mm-hmm. But I don't take responsibility for the end result of this dance, because who am I to take responsibility for that? Yeah. I take responsibility for doing my part. So I have to pay attention to the movements of the impersonal within me so I can do my part without resistance. And once that's done, that's the sum total of my responsibility, my friend. Beyond that, not my problem. Go talk to God. Don't come to me.
So I hear you talking about like control and kind of like going with the wave of like mind. Do we have free will? Do we have a choice in this? I mean, and how small are you getting with those things? Like, can I get a job I don't want to get? Do I have to do this that I want to do? Am I meeting my wife because I'm supposed to? Like, where do you kind of draw those lines in terms of you're fighting the wave versus going with the wave?
It's about learning to listen to the wave, because our inner lives are so polluted with narratives, with stories that we keep telling ourselves about what happened in the past, how it should have been, and because it was not how it should have been, what it did to us, and how it could have been differently, or stories about the future, what we want, but all the bad things that could happen, and what will I do then, and what if my wife leaves me, and we are so busy with this crap, with this mental trash, that we've become deaf to the obvious movements of the impersonal within us. And the movements of the impersonal within us are things that we feel. We know the impersonal by feeling the impersonal's feelings, by thinking the impersonal's thoughts. But even when we manage to do that, we think it's ours. We think it's us feeling that or us thinking that. And there is no 7 steps to identifying impersonal, I'm afraid. At least I don't know the 7 steps. What happened to me is that you grow up and then you suffer enough, and at some point you start realizing, oh, there is this thing going on within me, and it's not Bernardo, because it doesn't care about Bernardo's safety. It doesn't care about Bernardo's dreams. It doesn't care whether Bernardo will have a plate of food in front of him tonight or a roof above his head tomorrow. It doesn't care how much money Bernardo earns, whether Bernardo has status and fame or not. It doesn't care about any of that. Nothing. Zero. As far as the impersonal is concerned, if I drop dead tomorrow, all right, we find somebody else. So you just pick up on these signs. If you suffered enough and you're old enough and you grew up enough and you paid attention, because there are children that are 82 years old around, many children that are octogenarians today. But if you paid attention, you discern it. And that movement of the impersonal within you is what nature actually wants to do through you. And the ego is just that tool you need to know to which mouth to bring the fork. That's all. You need to know to which mouth to bring the fork. Otherwise, the tool is gone. The ego is tool maintenance. That's all. The ego is there to make sure that the tool remains alive, has enough means to express itself, but it doesn't run the agenda. It doesn't tell where it's supposed to go, what it's supposed to do. And if you've suffered enough and you paid attention, you pick up on the signs and then you refine it. And then you get to a point where it's not even subtle anymore. It's obvious. When the impersonal moves within you, you go like, oh shit, there he goes. What is it this time? But before you get to that point, the impersonal moves and you think you either don't hear it because you're so blinded by your inner storytelling, you're totally dissociated from yourself. You don't notice it, or you think it's you. And then what happens is you feel it, you think it's you, and then you go talk to yourself to figure out whether that's the right thing to do. That's the problem of thinking it's you, because you can do better. If the impersonal moves and you think that's my thought of my feeling, the next thing you do is this the right feeling? Should I be feeling like this? No. Is there where I want to go? No, that's not where I want to go. You see the problem? That's the problem of thinking the impersonal is you, because you think you can do better. You can iterate on that and get to a better answer. But if you recognize the impersonal for what it is, it's like, okay, this is it, boys and girls. There we go again, And I'll try to have enough money in the bank to keep my safety and keep the roof above my head, and maybe have medical insurance and not lose my partner. But for the rest, no, we are in for the ride. And if you resist that, you suffer. Because that's the feedback mechanism of the universe to tell you when it's not going the way it should.
Do you think you reached that? I know we're over time here, so I've just got a few more questions for you and I'll let you go. Do you think that's reached by meditation, psychedelic? Do you think you can find that better, or no, there's still too much noise with everything that's going on?
Psychedelics can make you more open in every aspect of your life. So think of psychedelics as a tonic. They are not the panacea. They are not the thing that's going to get you there. Life is going to get you there. That's why we live, because we need life to get there. Okay. But psychedelics can open you up a lot. They can erode all kinds of silly storytelling that you take for fact, while in fact it's just stuff that you're telling yourself. It's just mental garbage that you keep on circulating. Psychedelics dissolve that stuff, and they put a mirror in front of you and say, look, that's your own shit. It's nonsensical stuff. Now drop it and open up your heart and open up your view of the world, because the landscape is broad and you're looking at it through a pipe, not a telescope, a pipe. That they do. But what really gets you there is life. Okay. I got there after thinking about suicide twice. Oh, man. It can be that bad. Man. But if you pay attention, if you ask me what's the one thing you want to tell everybody to help them, I would say, pay attention to what's happening inside. Pay attention to how you react to yourself, to others, to the world. Pay attention to the movements of what you recognize as your own mind, because a lot of that is not your own. A lot of that is not your stuff. It's not Bernardo's. It's not Scott's stuff. it's transpersonal stuff. We are little boats on an ocean of the transpersonal, and there are waves and currents, and the boat goes along with the waves and the currents. Pay attention. And one day you wake up and you look back and you realize, wow, I understood so many things over the last 2 years. But you will never know it day by day. Every day you go to bed and you think like, I made no progress today. Next day, made no progress today.
Yeah.
And then after 2 years of that, one day you go like, shit, I've been making progress for 2 years. You only see it in hindsight. But if you pay attention, the recipe our culture tells us is the following. You're feeling bad? Okay. Work harder, make more money, buy the next phone, buy the next pair of shoes, and you feel better, right? Guaranteed. That's what we are taught.
Yeah. So true. Get that.
And then we don't pay attention because you're busy with making money to buy the next pair of shoes, and you think that will solve the problem. And it solves the problem for about 2 hours. And then the new pair of shoes, not news anymore. And then you need the next one and the next one. And unfortunately, there are people who keep playing this loop until they are in their 80s. And they wake up when they are lying in their deathbed. Too late.
Yeah.
No loss. Your life was not about you all along anyway. And even the insight that you wasted your life, even that insight is tremendously important for the broader cognitive context in which we are inserted. So your life is never for nothing. Never. It's impossible for you to organize your life so it is futile. It's completely impossible. Even if you try, if you make that your life's goal to make your life totally futile, you can't do that. But it can be productive or even more productive. And if you pay attention, I think it can be more productive. There are so many things that grieve me that I've abandoned. Like, where do I want to be in 5 years? If you ask me that question today, my reply will be a sincere belly laugh. It's like, wow, that's a silly question. That's not how this works. You haven't understood the game yet.
That's where I am. I don't think I've understood the game yet because I still do that.
But you shouldn't blame yourself because the entire self-help industry in the West is based on the assumption that your life is about you and you have to take control of it. The whole self-help industry is based on this. Rare exceptions. If you listen to today's Deepak Chopra, he's an exception. Yeah. And one of the few exceptions that get visibility. But it's a rarity. It's a rarity. All these people who go on stage and pump you up. There is Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins.
Yeah. Tony Robbins.
Did I get the name right?
Yeah. I think I believe that's him.
Yeah. It's somebody once showed me this guy jumping and fist pumping on the stage, and you can do it, and you can get where you want. And I was like, my God, this is so dysfunctional. I mean, but then you latch onto that, and then you're in for a ride. Yeah. God help you. God help you.
Yeah, I feel like it's everything right now. It's like that. I think I just had a conversation with my wife yesterday. It's like, oh, for 5 years, we want to be in a house, and you want to have this, and you want to have that, and you want to have all these ducks in a row, and you want.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
Okay.
I want to build a basement in my garden shed in 2 years.
That's an okay goal.
And it's okay. These are the ancillary things of life, circumstantial stuff. What I mean by where do you want to be in 5 years is the core of your life. Now, who do you want to be? In what position do you want to be in your life? What do you want to be doing with your life in 5 years? And that's an invitation for the ego to try to take control of a natural process within which the ego is inserted. Mm. You see, it's like the tail trying to wag the dog. Yeah. That's what we keep on trying to do. The ego is the tail. It can't wag the dog. But the entire self-help industry is there to show you how that can be done. And the cruel thing is, it may even work for a time. Because if it didn't work at all, never, it would fizzle out. People would see through it. The problem is that it does work for a time. Enough that you think, oh, that's the way to go. And then it stops working. And you remember, oh, but it did work for a time. So I have to get back to that. And if you don't, then it's your fault because it's proven that it could work. No, nothing was proven. It was just an illusion. It never really worked. It was a very superficial thing that sort of massaged your ego for a little while. They never last long, never. But yeah, again, we destroyed religion by pretending that it is a moral code. We surrendered to the ego's need to control nature, which it can't. It's a part of nature. And we confuse playing the game well with understanding the game, like that 5-year-old world champion in a computer game. So that's the trinity of our disaster, the three greatest misunderstandings that underlie our nihilistic condition today.
Man, it's put so well. Before I let you go, how confident are you that you are correct? That you've kind of hit the nail on the head as close as humanly possible? And is there anything that would be like, oh, I need to change my way of thinking about this. I've messed up. Is it through science, or are you pretty set on, through your experiences, through your life, your studies, that you've kind of nailed? And it feels, and I've heard you say this in other interviews, like an Eastern religion type mentality. Do you feel like you I don't know, 50-50, 90% to your bones, you believe this to be true?
I am in a place where I'm not busy with this question, if you understand what I mean. Because if I tell you I'm very confident, then people would have reason to think, well, he's not skeptical enough. And that's because they are in a place in which truth is conceptual. So if you're manipulating concepts in your mind through the rules of logic and evidence, as if it were a domino game in which you have to put the pieces together in the right order, if that's what truth is for you, then you have to be skeptical at all times. You always have to be open to a better solution to the puzzle that you're trying to solve with your dominoes, because it's all up in the clouds of your head. It's not tangible. It's not palpable. It doesn't permeate your entire being. It's not something that you can sit on and rest on with the security of a concrete foundation. It's something that's still up there. It's fragile. If you wave your hands too much, the dominoes fall out of place. So when you're dealing with truth conceptually, which is the business of analytic philosophy, academic philosophy is in that business. Truth is conceptual. So how can you be sure? No, you can never be sure. Of course, you can never be sure. If that's what truth is for you, the right organization of the dominoes in the clouds of thinking, you can never be sure. But when it sinks down, it's not that you are sure, it's that you're not speaking that language anymore. You are not in that place where the question arises and where the question makes sense. You are in a place where that question plays no role. Okay. The question of how confident I am in my view of the world is a question that bears no relevance to me today. Maybe I'm wrong, but it doesn't matter. Because I'm not operating only with concepts in the clouds of spirit anymore.
Okay. And then when you've referenced Eastern religions and them kind of getting it, I guess, close to being right in terms of how you believe it to be, do you ever wonder why? I mean, like, where did this knowledge come from? Is it over the years, maybe people having NDEs, maybe psychedelics, and they've come to understand, like, how did this get filtered into our perceptions to where we're even aware of that possibility?
Because what is true is the world in which we are. We are part of the truth. Whatever the truth is, we are bang in the middle of it right now. It can't be any different. We may have a false account of the truth, but we are at all times acquainted with the truth just by existing. Because what is truth? Truth is the sum total of what is the case. And whatever is the case, we are in it. Because if it's not the case, then we are not there. It's not the case. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. So we are bang in the middle of the truth, even if our narratives about it are wrong. So it is not surprising that humanity throughout history has bumped again the stone of truth now and again. I mean, across geographies, across time. And of course, the way they describe that differs. And there comes personal symbology, personal metaphors, personal reference points, personal language. All of that then dresses up that immediate acquaintance with what's true and becomes a distorted narrative. But whatever is the truth, we are bang in the middle of it. And we are rooted in it because we are part of the truth. We are part of nature. Whatever nature is, it is what is true. And we arise from it. And we have our existence derived from it because we are segments of it. The problem is that we have many cognitive faculties, the youngest and least mature of which is conceptual reasoning, the intellect, which is 30 to 50,000 years old. Before that, living beings were walking this earth for 4 billion years, also interacting with their environment, also having to eke out a living, also needing to have a cognitive apparatus and cognitive functions. They had other cognitive functions that today we would describe as instinct, intuition, feeling, stomach feeling. In Dutch, there is an expression that's a belly feeling. But we lost contact with those other faculties because we have elevated the intellect to the position of only reliable cognitive faculty. Everything else is unreliable. The only thing you can trust is the intellect, even though the intellect has always been wrong throughout our history. It has only been tentatively or partially right. But we think it's the only game in town, it's the intellect. And of course, a muscle you don't use will atrophy. So we no longer recognize intuition. What we think is intuition is the thoughts you have when you're anxious, the stuff you fear might happen, or an expression of your wish-fulfilling prejudices, your hidden desires. Mm-hmm. We think that's intuition. Or arbitrary, random cognitive associations. We think that's intuition. And of course, these three things are not intuition, and they are very unreliable. So because they are unreliable, and we mistake them for intuition, we say intuition is unreliable. True intuition, we can't even notice anymore. We don't know what it is, and most people don't know to recognize that movement of the impersonal within them. They mistake it for their own arbitrary cognitive associations, for their own wish fulfillment activity, or their anxiety thoughts. They mistake all that for intuition. So what I'm trying to hint at is the following. Before the intellect, we have known the truth because we are rooted in the truth with the roots of intuition and direct acquaintance with it, because we are part of the truth. We are not point of view from nowhere. We are inserted in the universe, in nature. We are part of it. We are rooted in it. If you pay attention to what's happening through your roots, you recognize what's going on. It's not difficult because we are planted in the middle of it and there is nowhere else we can ever go. But we've evolved this canopy of thoughts up here, which is the arena in which I play my own game. I use logic and reason to undermine the mistakes of pseudo-logic and reason. Mm-hmm. But if you get too lost in that canopy of airy spiritual activity, thoughts, abstract thinking, then you turn reality into a conceptual game, and then you ask yourself the question, how sure can I be? I guarantee you, the tree that's rooted in the warm, dark, moist soil is never asking itself, is the soil, how sure I am that the soil is true? The tree is not asking that question. You see, to ask that question, you have to be lost up there in the canopy, so high up, you can't see the roots anymore. And then you go like, do roots really exist? How confident can I be? You know what I mean?
That's so well put. So I know it's used as a knock on religion is that, oh, your religion is nothing special because look at all these religions that have things in common with your religion. But really,
they're all saying the same thing.
But really, that should be the strength of it then, is that we're all part of this, like the roots, and it all has symbolism and things that have to do with each other because it's the truth that it's talking about. It's trying to address the truth.
And the story that you heard from neo-atheists, you used to hear them 15, 20 years ago. Luckily, that social phenomenon is now past. The story that religions cannot all be true because they all say different things. So if Christianity is right, then Islam is wrong and Buddhism is wrong. I mean, you can only say that if you don't know anything about religion, or if you only scratched the juvenile, puerile surface.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you have spent any time and a little bit of maturity and sophistication of thought to dig a tiny little bit deeper, you realize that at core, everybody's saying the same thing. I mean, let me give you just a dramatic example, which is similar all the way to the surface. You don't even need to scratch the surface. In Christianity, we have the Trinity, right? Jesus is the incarnation of God, and then you have the Godhead, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
In Hinduism, Krishna is the incarnation of Vishnu, and Vishnu is one of the Trinity of Brahma, Vishnu, and no,
this is testing your knowledge.
It has escaped me, but it's the same thing. There is a Trinity, which is the sum total of existence, and then there is an incarnation. Even the name Krishna and Christ, or Christos in Greek. But I mean, I could go on, and the similarities between Buddhism and Christianity are notorious. So much so that scholars think they must have had a common origin. Buddhists must have migrated to the Middle East, or people from the Middle East, maybe Jesus himself, have gone to India and learned Buddhism and then returned and brought that message, and which became Christianity. I mean, the similarities is just flooring. So it is, and if you compare, let's go further to the more pre-literate side of things, the myths of Amazonian tribes and the myths of Australian Aborigines. Now, these are peoples separated by geography and time by tremendous distances, tens of thousands of years apart, and in opposite sides of the globe, literally. And you look at their mythology, for a tribe in the Amazon, the world is a dream of Nainema. So Nainema had a very ephemeral dream, and he tried to keep the dream alive. So he tied it up with a little knot. Then he brought his dream down, and then he stamped on his dream until he entered the dream, and he became a participant of the dream. Now, this story, you find that in the Aboriginals in Australia, in which God dreams the world and then wakes up within his own dream, and then becomes subject to the rules of the dream, so much so that he has to hunt and cook and eat the animals of the dream, even though the animals sprout from his armpit. I mean, there are parallels. I mean, I'm not saying that they are all the same myth. There are tremendous differences as well, because people dress it up with their references, their prejudices, and the story gets distorted over time to serve different social agendas and power agendas. But if you drill down to the root and you look at the significant things, not the details, everybody's bumping against the same rock and describing it differently. But across those differences, you can discern the same rock everybody bumped against. Just going joyfully around the life, and boom, you bump your face against a rock, and you go like, and then you write it down. Everybody bumped against the same rock, because that's the rock of reality. We are always in it, always. Whether we have a proper account of it or not, we are all bang in the middle of it. It's no surprise everybody bumped against the same rock. That's
so interesting. I didn't know you were that, I guess, not that I am at all, but well-versed in religion and all these different old myths and symbolism.
No, I'm not. I'm certainly not a religious scholar. If you compare me to Jeffrey Kripal, I'm not even an ant in the world of Jeffrey Kripal. So I only pick up some really, really salient things,
Okay. Last question for you is, in your view, what are materialists not getting? Why? I don't know how many people have come over to kind of your side, and then I don't really see many debates by choice. I mean, maybe you have had some, but you see like the same Sam Harris, you know, certain people out there like constantly discussing these kind of topics, but you don't see someone like yourself maybe debating those people. Now, is that something that they refuse to do, or is it something you just kind of don't want to have to deal with?
Oh, I've debated recently some well-known materialists. I have, end of last year, I had a debate with Patricia Churchland. I mean,
Okay.
they're well-known in the academic world. So these are respected materialists. I'm not talking about, you know, the
Celebrities.
loud celebrities who you may question whether do they really know anything about what they're saying. I'm not talking about the famous, loud people. I'm talking about people who have content. I mean, frankly, Sam Harris is a kid. I mean, anyway, let me not get into that. But the guy is not really a thinker at all. He has just a very big opinion of himself, and I don't know how he became famous having just that. I don't know who helped him, but it's not somebody I would be thrilled to exchange thoughts with. I don't take him seriously. Let me be absolutely frank. I don't take the man seriously. I don't take Hawking's, that English professor. I don't take him seriously. Not really Hawking. No, not Hawking.
Dawkins?
Not Stephen Hawking, but the atheist.
Richard Dawkins.
Richard Dawkins. Sorry, Dawkins. I
always get them mixed up. So
I don't take Dawkins seriously. I wouldn't be thrilled. I mean, if I'm asked to do, and I would do it because I don't want people thinking that, Bernardo is running away.
Yeah.
But that would be the sole reason I would do that for. I don't take him seriously.
Have they ever publicly criticized you? Because I'm not in that world really. Have they ever, Sam Harris or Richard?
Sam publicly criticized Idealism.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure he had me in mind because it was a question posed to him by Lex Friedman. And there is only one reason that question would have been put to him. But he didn't mention my name, which if I were in his position, I wouldn't do either, because the moment he would mention my name and I would challenge him for a debate, he would have to accept.
Yeah, because then he's dodging.
Well, I didn't say that. You extract your own. I debated his wife. His wife had the balls.
I'll have to listen. Is that publicly available? I can go find it and listen to it. Okay.
Yeah. These debates were organized by the Institute of Art and Ideas. I think you may need to register, but I don't think you need. I don't know what their earning model now is, but at least extracts I think are freely available from the IAI website. I don't know.
That's funny. You debated with his wife. So did she kind of carry his water a little bit? I mean, was it just?
Well, she's a panpsychist.
Oh, okay.
And I think panpsychism is nonsensical. It contradicts physics. Mm-hmm. So it ends right there, and you don't even have a debate. But in that sense, she seems to be more open-minded. I don't know. She's not really a philosopher either.
Okay.
But I debated Patricia Churchland, who is a philosopher, professor, materialist, has always been, 75 years old, defended materialism all her life. And the first significant thing she said in our debate after our opening statements was, I'm not really a materialist, I'm an agnostic. And then that killed me because, I came armed to the teeth, primed and pumped, ready to start shooting. There is another English professor, very famous in England, not Dawkins, but the next guy after Dawkins. He debated a Jewish rabbi once, and he's famously for having said to the rabbi, F you.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So no, how to say, not an innocent and harmless opponent, but he also started his debate with me by saying, I actually might be open to Bernardo's position, but I'm not sure. And it destroyed me again. I had a debate with that anesthesiologist who tried to debunk NDEs. He's a Dutch guy.
Oh, I think I know who you're talking about.
He's almost a personal friend. He almost became a personal friend because he's more intelligent than I thought. I mean, he gets a lot of bad press, and he's portrayed as just a silly debunker. Mm-hmm. And if you're a debunker, you're not a thinker. You have an agenda. So I don't take that seriously. But he's more thoughtful. He's really thoughtful. He's not what I thought he was going to be. Gerard Vourlet.
Okay.
I think in English you would say Worley.
Oh, okay.
Gerard Worley, I think you would pronounce. But in Dutch it is Gerard Vourlet.
Okay.
I was surprised because in our conversation, the point he was making is that consciousness is always there, even during anesthetics. And he's an anesthesiologist.
Yeah.
So he was insisting on that point. Consciousness is a basic operating system. It's always there, even when you seem unconscious. And I was like, man, let me shake your hands because that's... And I invited him to write an essay for Essential Foundation, a foundation that promotes idealism. Mm-hmm. And he wrote it.
Wow.
He wrote an essay for Essential Foundation, basically saying consciousness is a primary operating system. Now, he's still a materialist, but he's a materialist that's not blind to the evidence, even when the evidence starts to suggest something else. Because under materialism, consciousness is something that is created by a very particular pattern of brain activity that's very delicate, and you lose it very quickly. And what he's saying is that, no, it's robust. It's always there. Even under anesthesia, general anesthesia, you're still conscious. And well, that's music to the ears of an idealist, even though he's a materialist. So he's not an idealist. He's still a materialist, but he's a materialist I respect because he's not just selecting what he talks about on the basis of what dovetails well with materialism. Mm-hmm. He talks about what he sees to be the case. And I respect that. I think before he checks out from the game, he may come around.
Well, Bernardo, I can't thank you enough. I mean, it's been really a good conversation, especially when we're talking about suffering and death and all that kind of stuff. It helps me kind of clarify some thoughts and things to think about moving forward. And I really appreciate you taking the time and doing so. I really enjoyed the conversation. If people want to know more about you, what you're up to, where's the best place to go?
BernardoKastrup.com. So Bernardo is Bernard with an O, and Kastrup is Kastrup of Peter, Kastrup, one word.com. And then there are links to all kinds of free stuff, essays, academic articles, even my second PhD thesis, interviews, videos, audio, all kinds of stuff there. Everything is linked from there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, sir. I really appreciated it.
My pleasure. It was a pleasure.